Chapter 311. NT. Regular Chapter. Chapter 311. The fifth god slaughtered the forces of Destruction Army. Jin Young Master et al. Were stationed nearby. Although they also wanted to the end result of this battle, they couldn't put down the contention over dragon essence. They did not have the time and luxury to witness someone else's battle. A cold blade tip swept through the golden divinities and cut across all the way, releasing a burst of golden light everywhere in the sky and cracking open voids at several spots. The chaos was visible on the other side of the cracks. Boom! This collision was comparatively much more terrifying than the earlier one. The fifth god rushed toward Yi Shiwen, just like an ancient god, carrying an unusually dreadful power with him that appeared to be divine in nature. Their bodies were glittering, and it seemed as if two golden statues of ancient gods had suddenly come to life and were engaged in a crazy battle. Bang! A dreadful force ran through the halberd and penetrated into the fifth god's body, instantly rupturing his flesh and churning his blood. His huge body was sent flying horizontally all the way before maliciously crashing into a mountain peak. Everyone was dumbfounded as the battlefield had been divided into two parts. One part of the battlefield was hosting the life and death battle between Yi Shiwen and the fifth god, while the other part was witnessing a fierce competition among Jin Young Master, as well as some profound elusive experts with profound cultivations, each of them competing for the dragon essence. Although there were a lot of experts on the other side having intense fights with each other, the battle between Yi Shiwen and the fifth god was genuinely tragic. These two were ruthless, merciless, and simply did not give any value to each other's existence. Especially the fifth god, who was accustomed to being domineering and tyrannical, and this was the first time he completely fell under the wind. Moreover, among all the battles had with peers of his age and level, this was an unprecedented one. After all, not even a few of them were able to push him back to such an extent, let alone a kid like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and rushed forward while towing his long blade, step by step across the sky. It seemed as if the size of the sky was shrinking inch by inch in his presence. As his glistening figure flickered once, almost in a breath's time, he caught up with the fifth god. The long blade transformed into a long dragon, and its cold, cutting edge swept down directly upon the enemy. The fifth god suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like a blade, chilling and quite scary. He shot once again by channeling a surge of killing intention through his long halberd, all the way toward Yi Shiwen. Shwa! Yi Shiwen raised his long blade to block the incoming attack. Boom! Yi Shiwen stood firmly where he originally was, but the space around him collapsed immediately under the impact of this horrifying attack. The long halberd broke the universe. The fifth god also took advantage of this opportunity to catch Yi Shiwen off guard. He was breathing heavily, had clenched his teeth with his face showing the appearance of a god that was ready to kill. Intermittent rays of golden light was twinkling through his body, and one could see a bunch of quaint illegible text flashing within his body and slowly combining together to form an ancient scripture. It's an incomplete ancient scripture, Yi Mo exclaimed loudly. No wonder they dare to call themselves the army of God. It turns out that they really have obtained a part of God's inheritance. Ancient scripture? What is that? Yi Shiwen asked. There is a detached part of the universe, aloof from life and death. It is said that 6 fearful powerhouses jumped out of there. They claim to be gods, and some of them left behind ancient scriptures, which are the essence of their spiritual life, and have recorded the entirety of their perception of the universe, along with all sorts of magical spells and whatnot. Each time an ancient scripture makes an appearance, it causes bloody battles. Yi Mo explained. This fifth god had possibly obtained 1 page of an ancient scripture. No wonder he is tough, fierce, and so hard to deal with. Gods are actually considered as taboo in Jinwujie. No one knows whether such a creature really exists or is just a myth. However, whether it's a legend or not is not entirely hidden from Yi Shiwen, because he is exposed to a little something about gods. He can say for sure that gods are truly frightening creatures. Some demon beasts that seemed to have the blood of God flowing in their veins were much more powerful than ordinary demon beasts. No wonder even a single page of an ancient god scripture was enough to create an earth-shattering powerhouse like the fifth god. Yi Shiwen, this is a big opportunity. Ha 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 ha. Yimo shouted. So what if he only has one page? It is still priceless. You will simply be unable to estimate its value no matter how much you try. You know, it is said that the gods only taught their ancient secrets to a handful of confidants and disciples. Unless a powerhouse like that falls from the sky, there is no way to obtain such a priceless treasure. You should consider yourself extremely lucky if you manage to obtain even a single page of an ancient god scripture. Snatch it away before anyone else does. Others simply have no way to bring out the real value of this page. But if it falls into your hands, then it's a different case altogether. You will be able to parse out massive amounts of information about the ancient god scripture inside your mysterious space, which would bring immeasurable benefits to your future cultivation. Yi Mo and Yi Shiwen had been together for so long. Naturally, Yi Mo was aware of the existence of the mysterious space, because Tianyuan Mirror was now owned by Yi Shiwen. Hence, the tool spirit of the mirror just couldn't betray his master. Now, Yi Mo was like a confidant to him and knew almost everything about Yi Shiwen apart from the fact that he had come from the earth. The fifth god's back was burning with bursts of energy, and each illegible character floating behind him contained the essence of true Tao. A unit of golden light fell upon his body and gradually healed his injuries. However, the fifth god's complexion turned even more unsightly as he realized that the ancient page in his hand couldn't be used easily. Right now, he had actually been compelled by Yi Shiwen to bring it out and use it to defend himself. However, he could clearly feel the greedy looks centering upon him from all sides. He could sense the burst of joy popping in the hearts of almost all experts present on the scene, with their eyes full of greed. Of course, this outcome was perfectly conceivable. Even if he managed to kill Yi Shiwen, the news about this ancient page would still attract numerous experts to him, let alone the members of Destruction Army, Jin Young Master, and the others whose burning hot gazes seemed extremely scary. Even an ordinary expert would be more than able to understand the preciousness of an ancient god scripture. Even if there was only one page, it would still be considered as a priceless treasure. No one could say for sure that gods really existed in this world, but there were a lot of people who believed that when someone kept on progressing and arrived all the way at the level of gods, they would acquire immortality and live forever. This was the so-called interpretation of God in the hearts of a vast majority of genius experts. The gods are not indifferent. They do not govern myriad types of things under the sun. In the heart of an expert, the god is a super strong and absolute being, and anything he leaves behind is priceless treasure. Even a standalone page from an ancient god scripture is not an exception to that. Its value is inestimable, even more than the value of the dragon marrow, because its effects are anyway going to be for a while, but one page from an ancient god scripture, once perceived through meditation, would help one in achieving much greater benefits which would stay for a lifetime. Yi Shiwen, prepare yourself to die, said the fifth god, as these words jumped out through the gaps between his teeth. His facial expression became more and more ferocious. No matter what kind of trouble he would have to face in the future, right now, the biggest problem for him was that Yi Shiwen. He vowed to himself that he would definitely kill Yi Shiwen. The fifth god's head was glowing brightly with the influence of ancient god scripture, sweeping away one after another. His state was restored to the pinnacle. His vitality was brimming as it seemed like his long halberd was applying horizontal compression on the sky, breaking the surrounding space and creating openings to the chaos. All of this was aimed at Yi Shiwen along with the surge of God's coercion that swept toward Yi Shiwen while shaking the entire world in the process. Yi Shiwen was calm without fear. The long blade in the hand bloomed into a terrifying blade light. His golden clothes also released bursts of golden light that obscured half of the sky as the ice-cold tip of his blade cut horizontally toward the incoming attack. Bang! The tips of the blade and the halberd had a fierce collision in midair, leading to a gorgeous explosion that swept away as many things as possible in the range and opened cracks in the surrounding space. There was no comparison between the power displayed by the fifth god just now and what had been showing all this time. This was the effect of the page from an ancient god scripture, which was also his trump card. Once used, there was no turning back. A frightening force swept over to the side of the fifth god. That one page of ancient god scripture began to emit intermittent sounds of the chanting of ancient sutras from behind him. It was hard to tell how many eras had passed since the power of this ancient sutra chanting had been sealed inside that page, so as to block it from leaking outside. As the raging energy storm rushed past Yi Zaiwen's body, his golden clothes danced crazily in the stormy winds. Even while facing the sudden, insanely strong rise in the fifth god's power, Yi Zaiwen's complexion remained unchanged. He just lightly said, "Your only option is to break through to the third stage of half-step legendary realm right now, or you shall die without a doubt. I will guarantee you that much." So long as one was not a complete fool, one could clearly sense a burning, killing intention in the fifth god's heart. In fact, the fifth god never harbored a small killing intention toward his enemies because weeding out an enemy had been his principle all along. Everyone was aghast with a sudden strike of amazement that took them off guard. Just now, they saw the power of the fifth god, but they just couldn't comprehend as to what exactly was emboldening Yi Shiwen to the extent that he openly threatened the fifth god with no hesitation whatsoever. Of course, he also seemed to have enough power to defeat the fifth god. Many experts were looking at Yi Shiwen. Such audacity, the fifth god said with a sneer. He naturally did not dare to look down on Yi Shiwen anymore and had to put away his usual stance of overlooking all living things in front of him. However, he still could not come to terms with himself and felt like he might be able to kill Yi Shiwen. No wonder he was offering a sacrifice by resorting to using all his might and secrets in order to defeat Yi Shiwen. Die! The fifth god shouted angrily, grasped the long halberd, and rushed forward while sweeping away the overflowing godly might along with him. One could see a type of simple and unadorned aura, somewhat ancient in nature, being increasingly released by the ancient god scripture behind his body. It was really like looking at a god. He went toward Yi Shiwen while leaving behind a trail of chaos. His black halberd appeared just like a black flood dragon as it roared loudly and soared into the sky from the abyss. Today, I will let you know what disparity of strength truly means. Yi Shiwen sneered and immediately used the long blade in his hand to release a blade light as bright as the stars, dazzling the entire sky. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen was holding the entire horizon in his hand as his long blade. Bang! With a horrifying sound of the collision, Yi Shiwen and the fifth god severely crashed into each other. The page of ancient god scripture also collided severely with Yi Zaiwen's golden divinities, and the impact caused the space avalanche in the surrounding region, exposing the jet-black turbulence on the other side. It was like a battle between two gods, and the scene was simply spectacular. Yi Zaiwen's Bladiki contained an irresistible force, and it cut off the fifth god's golden light right away. The golden light dispersed. Figures of the two godlike warriors crisscrossed, then staggered apart from each other as the fifth god's body suddenly made a poochie sound and blood came gushing out. His tall body had been cut into two halves, slantingly downward all the way from the shoulder. There was an utter look of disbelief on his face. He just could not believe that he was defeated so easily in a blink of an eye. Then, abruptly, a big hand descended from the sky and attempted to grasp the fifth god's corpse in midair. To be continued. Chapter 312, NT, Regular Chapter. Chapter 312, Dragon Essence is captured then, abruptly. A big hand that was made up of chi descended from the sky and attempted to grasp the fifth god's body. That was the old patron saint who suddenly rushed out of the competition, going on over the dragon essence to grab the fifth god's corpse. Originally, the fifth god's corpse shouldn't have been so important to fight over, but it happened to contain one page of an ancient god scripture. The old patron saint wanted to capture the fifth god's corpse before anyone else and use the ancient knowledge contained in it to enhance his own martial art practice. It would take time because that entire page had already been refined by the fifth god, and its essence was located inside his corpse. Do you want to die? Yi Shiwen instantly waved his long blade, and that big hand, which was extending toward the fifth god's corpse, was directly chopped off and extinguished the next instant. Yi Shiwen, you've already swallowed the flood dragon's corpse, and now you also want to seize the page of an ancient god scripture? The old patron saint looked coldly at Yi Shiwen and said. There was a look of greed clearly visible on his face. Even a page from an ancient scripture was enough to make anyone excited. Yes, it's mine. If you really want to die, then come on and fight me. Yi Shiwen sneered. He struggled hard in a life-or-death kind of battle with the fifth god, and once it was all over with his victory, that old patron saint wanted to meddle in and reap the benefits as a third party. He would certainly not allow that to happen so easily. Yi Shiwen's eyes seemed even deeper and much profound, as if the birth and death of the universe itself were repetitively taking place in the depths of his eyes. Hand over the ancient scripture to me, and we genie guards will guarantee your safety during your stay in the Ming Empire. Jin Young Master also appeared at this time, and said while completely ignoring the ongoing fight over the dragon essence. Although the dragon essence was precious as well, but when compared with a page of ancient god scripture, it was not so important actually. Forget about the experts of legendary realm. Even the sage-level experts would go crazy for something like that. The genie guards, the black-robe powerhouse, as well as those elusive powerhouses of the older generation, were staring at Yi Shiwen. The value of ancient scripture was simply inestimable, and it was now inside the corpse of the fifth god. The one who would capture the corpse would also get a hold of that page. Moreover, there was a possibility that one might also manage to sense the rest of the ancient scripture by using that one page as the first step. When did genie guards start doing the work of bodyguard for random strangers? Yi Shiwen sneered and said while making it very clear to everyone that he had his own aspirations regarding this page, and nothing could convince him to give it up that easily. Humph, you sure do know how to talk big, young man. However, you must know that sometimes it is best for your own good to act humbly and listen to your seniors. At this time, an old man with profound cultivation stood up and said with a sneer, Today I will teach you how to be respectful toward your seniors. The old man sneered again and blasted his fist, wielding the might of some type of terrifying boxing technique, all the way toward Yi Shiwen. The fist pressure swept over like a mighty ocean wave toward Yi Shiwen, as if to suppress the eternal domain with indomitable might. Old fogey, you alone dare to challenge me? Yi Shiwen sneered and slashed with his long blade, releasing a radiant blade light that darted off in all directions along with a burst of deafening sharp sound. The blade light instantly flew toward the incoming fist pressure from multiple directions. Poochie! Yi Shiwen's blade light annihilated the fist pressure in a flash by instantly cutting it into two halves. The blade light didn't stop there, but went forward and directly crashed into the old man's body. Poochie! That old man was caught off guard and was instantly cut in half by Yi Shiwen. Who else wants to try his luck? Come out right now, Yi Shiwen said as he cast his ice-cold gaze skimming through the crowd. Everyone was suddenly spellbound, had their minds blown away. They recalled how the fifth god, an expert at the second stage of half-step legendary realm, was unable to deal with Yi Shiwen's tyrannical power. He just never stood a chance against Yi Shiwen. Not to mention several experts were directly slaughtered by him. No one was able to push Yi Shiwen into the disadvantageous situation throughout the course of battles so far in this small world. In fact, no one was able to occupy the winning side, even for a short time while fighting with Yi Shiwen. The fifth god struggled for some time until he was finally killed by Yi Shiwen, which made them all aghast with amazement. Although they very much wanted to obtain the page of ancient scripture from Yi Shiwen, they didn't have the confidence to face Yi Shiwen and immediately retreated at the first sight of him. If they couldn't face Yi Shiwen, then might as well just feign ignorance. The experts were like they couldn't do anything about it anyway, and began to hesitantly join the competition over the dragon essence. The dragon essence just lay like a dragon's corpse in the sky, with a unit of terrifying attraction force originating from it that was increasingly pulling them toward the corpse. Yi Shiwen also joined the competition immediately. With a flash of golden light, A big golden hand extended toward the dragon essence. Yi Shiwen, you've already obtained so much, but you are still eyeing dragon essence. Jin Young Master said in a discontented manner, what a joke. Don't tell me that you think of this as some kind of fair treasure hunt where everyone gets a share from the treasure trove? Something like one treasure per person? Remember, only those who are capable get to keep the heavenly treasures. Others simply keep on waiting and just watch from the sidelines. Yi Shiwen sneered and simply didn't pay any attention to Jin Young Master's words. Jin Young Master's complexion immediately turned unsightly. He secretly vowed in his heart that he would make Yi Shiwen go through hell. After exiting this small world, he would mobilize genie guards from all over the Ming Empire, while making sure that Yi Shiwen would be meeting a tragic end no matter what. Nt. Si Wuzong Shinji Di. To die without a burial site. To die a pauper, a tragic end. How could Yi Shiwen not know what Jin Young Master was thinking at the moment? Just by looking at his mutated facial expression, Yi Shiwen knew that he was planning to take revenge. However, Yi Shiwen was not at all bothered because of a simple reason. There are a large crowd present in the vicinity, and some of them were bound to publicize this matter as soon as they would go out. Hence, he was already prepared to face the imminent crisis and all sorts of problems and stress that were soon going to come his way. In fact, he was prepared to be chased down as well, so adding genie guards to all this mess would actually make no significant difference either. However, he knew that there was nothing to solve this issue unless he could kill everyone, otherwise there was literally no visible way to avoid the disclosure of news. Therefore, he was not planning to let go of the dragon essence because his only option was to do all he could to upgrade his own strength in an attempt to increase the possibility of his survival in the upcoming series of crisis. The top players and their respective groups simultaneously launched their attacks, concentrating their combined powers onto the dragon essence. Although it was shaped as a dragon, it wasn't a real dragon. If it was a real dragon, then it would be impossible to break defense with this level of attacks. Boom! There resounded a terrifying sound of an explosion, and the entire dragon essence shattered into pieces and spread throughout the sky. Without any hesitation, Yi Shiwen took out his Tianyuan mirror and sent it out, capturing the dragon essence's figurehead, which was located at its front end. At this time, other experts also went into action with the intention to not skip even a shred of dragon essence, capturing a piece after another with each of them grabbing their favorite piece. Yi Shiwen went in for another attempt to grab a piece, but by this time, there wasn't much left of the dragon essence's pieces. There were only a few pieces remaining, and Yi Shiwen instantly attempted to grasp the last remaining piece. Boom! Two big hands instantly collided in the sky. Both the Destruction Army and Yi Shiwen had spotted the same piece and tried to grab it at the exact same instant, only to end up rendering each other's attempt in vain. Meanwhile, taking advantage of the situation, other experts extended their big hands to grasp that piece of dragon essence. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted and swept out blade light that immediately chopped down all those big hands in midair and caused them to explode. That last piece of dragon essence finally ended up in Yi Ziwen's pocket. The masters felt their complexions turning pale by Yi Ziwen's attack, but they did not continue to get involved. After all, Yi Shiwen's tyrannical power had been fully reflected while neutralizing their collaboration attack. Not to mention the way he seized that last piece just now clearly revealed his insane strength. Moreover, they were more or less satisfied right now, as all of them had managed to obtain at least one piece of dragon essence, with some of them obtaining over 2 pieces as well. After all of this was over, the experts did not stay there any longer and immediately left the scene in abundance. Half a month later, in the depths of the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, the entire ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, as a result of losing the dragon essence, had mostly dried up in absence of nourishment from spiritual arteries. So the entire environment was very harsh, filled with sandstorms everywhere, almost to the point of exaggeration. One could see that even the experts of Truth Realm would be torn in half directly in this kind of harsh environment. The deeper they went in, these sandstorms continued to get more and more terrifying, and most importantly, It was very difficult for human experts to roam about in this environment, but there were some hidden demon beasts that were already accustomed to such an environment after millions of years of evolution. In fact, it seemed like these storms were somehow related to those demon beasts. The region ravaged by these sandstorms had become the lair of demon beasts, and they had even formed a kingdom inside these giant storms. Countless demon beasts were thriving inside this demon beast kingdom. As Yi Shiwen and his team ventured deeper, they found such storms getting more and more tyrannical with a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere. They arrived in front of such a giant sandstorm, which was about 10,000 meters high and several kilometers in diameter. It simply looked like a giant war fortress that was targeting to sweep away all the enemies. Yi Shiwen blazed with anger as soon as he saw many demon beasts lurking in this sandstorm. The sandstorm was huge, yet incredibly quick. Almost in a flash, it arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. The first ones to rush over were a type of sand-type demon beasts. Their bodies were wrapped in layer upon layer of sand, and each of them was at least a complete truth realm. They were working jointly to fire sand columns, which then condensed together into a huge sand column and seemed to have tremendous power of impact, enough to move the mountains. Yi Shiwen moved his palm and immediately blasted out a mysterious coiling dragon that soared out from the depths of the abyss, faced upwards and roared loudly. The huge sand column was directly torn open, and even though some sand beasts were at half-step legendary realm, they were instantly blasted away. Some were killed while some of them were severely wounded. But who was Yi Shiwen? He was an expert that had already reached the peak of half-step legendary realm, and his combat power was sufficient to defeat the experts of half-step legendary second stage, or even those at the third stage. There was no suspense in how his coiling dragon was able to tear that sand column apart. To be continued. Chapter 313. Chapter 313. Dragon Tomb. The wolf cub directly rushed forward and began an unscrupulous killing spree. The Mo siblings weren't as fierce as the wolf cub, so they just stuck to killing the sand beasts on the periphery. Yi Shiwen was also bombarding those sand beasts with unceasing attacks, one after another without the slightest pause in between. Frankly speaking, those sand beasts weren't his opponent at all. Whenever a sand beast was killed by Yi Shiwen, its essence and blood would be completely absorbed by him and instilled into the mysterious space. Inside the mysterious space, that one page of ancient god scriptures suddenly blossomed into unusually bright rays of light. The mysterious space was constantly deconstructing a variety of ancient heavenly avenues. Even a single page of ancient scriptures contained a lot of characters, with each having the essence of Tao. After all, these were the scriptures left behind by the legendary gods. The mysterious space is helping Yi Shiwen in decoding and extracting heavenly avenues from the scriptures. These avenues are basically the great Tao, aka profound underlying principles of the universe. On the one hand, the people of Zhenwu Jie completely denied the existence of the so-called gods. But on the other hand, they also believed that human beings could acquire godly powers by relying on their own efforts. Of course, this was a contradictory statement with respect to the previous one, but both of these beliefs had continued to pass down for millions of years. Inside the ancient scriptures, there was a faintly visible figure of a godly spirit that was unceasingly reciting those scriptures. It was constantly attempting in vain to break out of Yi Shiwen's body, but the mysterious space would exude bursts of 7 colored rays of light each and every time to suppress it down. That one page of ancient god scriptures was undeniably a godly item that once belonged to a legendary godly spirit, so it was bound to contain ancient wisdom. Not to mention, it certainly must have possessed a spirit in the past. Therefore, now that Yi Shiwen was trying to comprehend the profound meanings contained in it bit by bit, this whole process seemed like a plundering-type comprehension through meditation. The ancient avenues accumulated inside the mysterious space so far were being gradually extracted little by little, which appeared just like the spinning of a silk cocoon. Although there was only one page of ancient god scriptures to comprehend, Yi Shiwen could only dare to say that he understood some parts of it. However, he still felt that this time's harvest of knowledge and insights was far more than the knowledge he obtained by reading all those books in the library. Now it seemed like only Yi Zaiwen's team was still roaming in the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, while others had left long ago. Yi Zaiwen's harvest was just too big this time, with that one page of ancient god scriptures being the best of it. Everyone wanted to snatch it from him, and that was why most of the experts had left to inform their respective sections. They didn't have any other option but to call backup, because none of the participants in this time's conquest was capable of dealing with Yi Shiwen. There were many people who did not want to leave but could only choose to leave, because one could only rely upon one of the 8 sword commands to exit this small world. Otherwise, they would be trapped in this ruined world for a lifetime before collapsing together with it. This was why experts were so desperate to get their hands on the sword commands from the beginning, since capturing a sword command was equivalent to gaining the advantage of not being dependent on others. Yi Shiwen knew about their motives, so he couldn't leave this world. For the time being, he was safe here because one sword command was enough to exit this world, but all sword commands must be assembled together in order to open the entrance to this world. However, 4 of the 8 sword commands were already in Yi Zaiwen's possession. He had obtained one sword command from the Mo siblings, and the other 3 by plundering them from the 5th god's corpse. Therefore, it was impossible for the experts to enter this world from outside. Even if they wanted to come in, their only option was to wait for Yi Zaiwen on the other side of the entrance. Because of this situation at hand, Yi Shiwen could only opt to go all out with his cultivation and level up as fast as possible in order to cope with the terrifying attacks which might come his way sooner or later. Afterward, Yi Shiwen and his team continued to fight all the way until that small demon beast kingdom was completely wiped out by them. The fine blood and essence of the fallen demon beasts were directly absorbed by Tianyuan Mirror. At this time, Yi Shiwen and the others bypassed the sandstorm and finally reached the depths of the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction. Before their eyes appeared the entrance to a subterranean palace with large amounts of dragon power, Long Wei, scattered in all directions, along with some dead key mixed with it. This is dragon power. Fuck, there's so much of it. Could it be that this is actually a dragon's lair? The wolf cub suddenly gawked. His reaction was understandable. After all, the legend said that the dragon race was capable of contending with the legendary race of gods, making them one of the ruling races of 10,000 worlds. This statement was enough to showcase the terrifying influence of the dragon race. When one dragon could be considered such a tyrannical existence, a dragon's lair, or a dragon's nest to be precise, was enough to turn the sky and the earth upside down throughout the Zhenwu Jie. No, I think this is probably a dragon tomb, the final burial site for dragon lords, Yi Mo said with a frown. The dead key coming from inside is too thick and abnormally intense. It is impossible for a normal dragon's lair to have this type of dead key, not to mention if there really is a dragon living here. Then it would have shown up already. If we enter a dragon's lair, we will die for sure. However, if this is a dragon tomb, we have hit the jackpot. The wolf cub's eyes shone brightly. Dragon race is known to hoard all sorts of treasures, and a dragon's tomb is bound to have a lot of buried treasures inside of it. Most importantly, a dead dragon's skeletal remains are genuinely considered as priceless treasures. A dragon at the end of its lifespan will automatically go to the dragon tomb and await its death, but the location of a dragon tomb is something only a few know about. In fact, the location of a dragon tomb is considered the biggest secret even among the members of the dragon race. Only when a dragon reaches the end of its lifespan will it receive the summons from a dragon tomb. After that, it can follow a kind of inherent feeling to locate the dragon tomb. Not to mention, a dragon tomb is an unequaled divine storehouse of dragon bones. Dragons are always very sensitive about their tombs, so a dragon tomb is often considered as the most dangerous place to venture into. Yi Mo said, I must go in to have a look. After all, how can you obtain a tiger cub without entering a tiger's den? I don't have any other option right now, Yi Shiwen said with a somewhat helpless smile appearing on his face. He certainly had no other choice because he knew that people must be waiting for him outside to gang up on him as soon as he would exit this small world. Therefore, he must enhance his strength as much as possible. Yi Shiwen and his team entered the underground palace, and an overwhelming dragon power surged out to greet them. At this time, Yimo finally recognized what this place really was. This is not the tomb of a real dragon. It's the tomb of a flood dragon. Yimo suddenly spoke. Even so, it is definitely a big opportunity. I can tell that this dragon tomb has definitely existed for hundreds of thousands of years, long before the history of Wang Heavenly Faction even took its roots. I suspect that the Wang Heavenly Faction must have accidentally discovered this dragon tomb and used it as the foundation for their faction. That also explains the presence of a flood dragon egg in this small world. Yishuan nodded. Of course, the tomb of a flood dragon wasn't going to be as magnificent as the tomb of a real dragon, but this would also reduce the degree of risk involved by multiple folds. Because of the intermittent waves of dragon power rushing out of the entrance to the underground palace, those muddle-headed demon beasts never dared to approach this flood dragon tomb. No wonder it seemed like this place had remained undisturbed for an extremely long time. Dragon tobacco plant. Dragon mushroom. It took just a glance for Yi Shiwen to recognize a variety of rare herbs that had been growing there for 1,000 years, or even thousands of years. These herbs were absolutely priceless and could easily sell for over 1,000,000 ling dong. One must know that such rare herbs were growing on the outside, so it would be hard to tell what they were going to find on the inside. Only in a dragon tomb was it possible to see such rare things because right after the death of a dragon, its corpse slowly decomposed and dissolved nutrients into the earth, not to mention its flesh and blood did the job of irrigation for such rare herbs. Yi Shiwen and the Mo siblings would have never figured out the real preciousness of these herbs, if not for Yi Mo's explanations about them. The dragon mushrooms looked like dragon-shaped spirit mushrooms, as they were exuding the fragrance of spirit mushrooms. It was said that a millennium-old dragon mushroom could increase the lifespan of a living being by over 100 years. Not to mention these dragon mushrooms were only a small part of a variety of dragon mushrooms, some of which were 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old, and could even be up to 9,999 years old. Then it would transform into a dragon mushroom king. Besides dragon mushrooms, a variety of herbs could be seen growing in the vicinity of the dragon tomb. These best quality herbs were growing outside the underground palace and appeared like roadside weeds, as if nobody ever bothered to even touch them. The reason behind this was the decline of Wang Heavenly Faction that made it difficult for the outsiders to gain access to this small world. The native demon beasts of this world did not have the means to overcome their inherent fear of dragon power, so they never approached this place even if they drooled over obtaining those precious herbs. The dragon power merely acted as a suppression force upon sentient beings, but those muddle-headed demon beasts felt an instinctive fear of repression from it. Although this wasn't the tomb of a real dragon, Yi Shiwen and the others still managed to get their hands on priceless treasures. Yi Shiwen waved his hand and plundered the majority of best quality herbs in one fell swoop. Crap! You are really shameless, Yi Shiwen. The wolf cub saw Yi Shiwen making the first move and immediately rained curses on him. But he himself wasn't slow and seized over 100 spirit grasses. The Mo siblings were a bit slow and only managed to seize over a dozen spirit grasses each, but both of them were very satisfied. After all, they would be able to obtain over 1,000,000 ling dong, enabling them to crush an expert of peak legendary realm quite easily. Yi Shiwen got such a rich harvest outside the flood dragon tomb. This made him look forward to check out the hidden treasure trove inside the tomb. Aha, I tell you, Yi Shiwen, this is really a significant development. In the beginning itself, you obtained so many of these herbal medicines and most of which are capable of increasing the lifespan. It means these herbs can replenish your spiritual essence, and some can directly improve your skills as well. Yi Mo explained. You have obtained some dragon yuan grasses, which can help you in balancing out the overuse of phoenix regeneration by replenishing the lost life essence. To be continued, dash. Chapter 314. Chapter 314, Flood Dragon's Blood Pool. Yi Zaiwen's Heavenly Phoenix Regeneration was actually a supreme level secret technique. However, the consumption of life essence was something that even the phoenix race couldn't escape despite being so loved and favored by the heavens, let alone a human expert like him. It was said that at the end of a millennium of its lifespan, a phoenix reached nirvana and took rebirth after completely regaining its exhausted life essence. Yi Shiwen did not have the miraculous skill of the phoenix race, as reaching nirvana was equivalent to dying as a result of exhausting one's life essence entirely. Life essence is fundamental to maintaining the life of all living beings, and the so-called process of strengthening the foundation is to find ways to increase one's life essence reserves. While leading a pious life of martial arts practice, every breakthrough into the next stage can increase the lifespan by a corresponding increase in the life essence. However, Yi Zaiwen's consumption of life essence was just too fast. In fact, he estimated that he had already ended up consuming more than 50 years' worth of life essence, particularly while regenerating fatal wounds. He had been able to survive all those life-threatening situations all thanks to Phoenix regeneration technique, so he was reluctant to avoid using this technique even after knowing its shortcomings. Yi Shiwen could only continue to make breakthroughs one after another to offset the consumed life essence. So long as the breakthrough speed was fast enough to make sure that the regeneration rate of the life essence would always remain above the consumption rate, he should be able to survive. I will need to buy some appropriate herbs after exiting this world. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, yes, these herbs can be used to refine Shodan, Longevity Dan, and I have a gift to add to Shodan formula, so all you need to do is pay attention to collecting those raw materials for the medicinal pills. The refined pills always give more benefits compared to the ingredients, not to mention you can just sell the ones you don't need. This would form a positive feedback circle, and you will never lack life essence as a result of that. Yemo said, and Yemo is telling him to concoct immortality pills, then use the ones he needs to increase his life essence, and sell the ones he doesn't need. The selling of pills will bring in Ling Dawn, which would then be helpful in his cultivation and breakthroughs. The breakthroughs will increase his overall reserves of life essence. And Yi Shiwen nodded as on the road of martial art practice, the biggest natural enemy was none other than time itself. As long as there was enough time, even a pig should be able to practice. However, the struggle of life with the heavens could never be a simple matter because there was an absolute requirement of longer practice time to reach the higher levels of cultivation. Even if a Shodan would add only 50 years of life to one's lifespan, it was still enough to make everyone go crazy over it. It was well-known fact that the owner of an alchemy refining furnace would never lack financial resources. Of course, Yi Shiwen was aware of this and had been looking for a good opportunity to learn how to use it properly. Not to mention he had already obtained a mighty technique called Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics from Emo. It was the key to demonstrating the gate to the enlightenment of Tao, thereby making it more valuable than the ancient scriptures. Unfortunately, his Tao was not in agreement with it, otherwise his cultivation would be far greater than what it current was. However, even so, the Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics was of great significance to him. This above-mentioned tactic was introduced in Chapter 163. The refining method of poisonous dragon water control flag had also come from the Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics. Yi Shiwen and his team continued to go deeper into the underground palace. After stepping down a very long ladder which went all the way down for 700 meters, they saw a pleasant-looking hall that was massive. It was hundreds of meters in height. They weren't able to guess the width and depth of this hall, but they certainly saw a pool of blood that was about 100 feet in length. It was exuding traces of coercion in the air. Fuck! This is the blood pool of a flood dragon. The wolf cub glanced at the pool and exclaimed. The blood pool was long and slender like a river. When looking from above, it would actually appear in the shape of a flood dragon. Legends tell that flood dragons actually belong to the species of Asian dragons, Yalong species, and are closest to the real dragons in terms of habits and appearance, unlike other kinds of Asian dragon variants. This flood dragon's blood pool is an irrefutable evidence of that. The wolf cub said with a sigh full of emotions. According to the legends, The depths of the dragon world has dragon blood, and if an Asian dragon gets the opportunity to take a dip in it, it would be able to wash away the blood of other demon beasts from its own blood vessels and would acquire the pure blood of a real dragon. The gathering places of flood dragon tribal groups often have these so-called flood dragons blood pool. A very powerful flood dragon is able to release a part of its essence and blood to form a blood pool, and some Asian dragon species can soak in the blood pool to turn into pure-blood flood dragons. Yi Shiwen looked at the wolf cub and thought that this little beast really knew a lot about all this stuff related to dragons. However, it's such a pity that the essence and blood of flood dragon have almost been consumed completely. The remaining blood will only give some ordinary effects if applied. The wolf cub said in a disappointed tone. Yi Shiwen was not disheartened because so much blood was present in such a big blood pool. He could always extract enough essence and blood to make the poisonous dragon water control flag take a thorough rebirth with all of the deep-water black snakes evolving into flood dragons. Yi Shiwen was about to seize the flood dragon blood when the entire pool shook up all of a sudden, and a group of huge monsters soared out. More than 100 huge figures appeared in front of them in the blink of an eye. Flood dragons. How can there be so many of them? Exclaimed Yi Mo as he remembered how hectic it had been to defeat one young flood dragon. And now that so many of them suddenly appeared out of the blue, he didn't know what to do. Yi Shiwen also saw that these monsters had dark bodies and were releasing terrifying dragon power, just like the young flood dragon that he had seen earlier. Yi Shiwen was suddenly overjoyed to see so many flood dragons at once. After all, even one young flood dragon had piqued the interest of so many people earlier. He calculated that all these flood dragons should be enough to refine all of the 108 sides of the poisonous dragon water control flag array, thereby reaching its perfection level along with an ultimate power surge. Moreover, the soul of Deepwater Black Snake King that was sealed inside the poisonous dragon water control flag would also transform into a flood dragon directly, which would then greatly increase its might. Yi Shiwen noticed that these flood dragons were different from that young flood dragon he had fought earlier. These baby dragons were originally from the Asian dragon species, Yalong species, and successfully transformed into flood dragons after immersing themselves into the flood dragon blood pool. Although they were at legendary first stage or second stage, they weren't as aggressive as the young flood dragon he fought previously. This difference arose from the inherent disparity between Xiantian, inborn nature, and Hotian, nurture. Roar! The flood dragons roared simultaneously in abundance, and it seemed like the sky would be torn to shreds any time now. At this time, they suddenly spat water swords from their mouths toward Yi Shiwen. The water swords instantly punctured the sky like extremely sharp thorns before falling down toward him. The attacks of these legendary level flood dragons were very swift and fierce. In fact, there was some kind of world law contained in those water swords, making them even more horrifying. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted and congealed a big golden hand. The water swords were all directly grasped by that big golden hand and crushed to pieces. Fortunately, these baby dragons had recently transformed into flood dragons, so their cultivation wasn't going to be too profound, or else the situation might turn quite troublesome. The big golden hand of Yi Shiwen instantly rose against the wind, getting bigger and bigger, and almost covered the entire underground hall as it grasped toward those flood dragons. His hand was like a giant fishing net, which immediately entrapped those flood dragons. They were struggling like trapped fishes, but had no way to break out of his clutches. Boom! 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 The flood dragons counterattacked furiously by spitting lightning from their mouths and violently somersaulting inside his grasp. It seemed as if thunder and lightning were dancing vertically and horizontally among cloud-covered mountains. The flood dragons were enraged as they opened their mouths to attack, but Yi Zaiwen's golden hand was just too big like the layers of golden clouds. The attacks certainly did hit his golden hand, but could only set off a burst of golden ripples in the divinities. There simply was no way to break free from his grasp. Yi Zaiwen's gilded tyrant form had been practiced to the fourth layer. And after passing through the baptism of both heavenly tribulation and that young flood dragon's blood, he had already reached the fourth layer's peak. Even after achieving such a tyrannical form, his gilded tyrant form didn't have a breakthrough because the fifth layer was yet to be deduced. These days, the mysterious space's main task had been to continue to deduce all sorts of ancient avenues. It could be said that he obtained enormous benefits as a result of that, which broadened his horizon as well as improved his cultivation. However, the deductions of other martial arts fell down significantly. In fact, even the deduction of coiling dragon palm diminished. Yi Shiwen had obtained stunning inheritances, such as the gilded tyrant form, that could grant him enough power to tear even the gods and devils to shreds. Similarly, the coiling dragon palm could break the heaven and earth when practiced to the acme level, but none of the two were complete. Each new layer needed full-fledged deduction in the mysterious space. Moreover, Yi Shiwen also lacked enough Ling Dawn to fulfill the requirement, especially when the requirement was so enormous. During the last 2 weeks' time, he had continued to kill demon beasts in order to obtain their demon cores. Now he was using the cores as the last resort. That was why he set a firm resolve that he would find a way to fix this problem after exiting this world. Wealth and cultivation go hand in hand on the path of martial arts practice. This is something which will always be true. Even if Yi Shiwen had enough Ling Dawn, the deduction of the next layers of such stunning secret techniques would need large numbers of Ling Dan and a lot of time to master as well. Fortunately, he had obtained the full version of Phoenix regeneration technique, so he didn't need to deduce the missing parts for this one. However, in order to grasp it more profoundly, he must spend a lot of time to comprehend it. All of these deduction processes involved huge energy requirements, which worried Yi Shiwen. However, they would certainly seem like worthwhile worries to the others. This explained why the gilded tyrant form didn't have a breakthrough to the fifth layer even after reaching the peak of the fourth layer. Not to mention, if it had actually reached the fifth layer, then the attacks of those flood dragons wouldn't have been able to set off ripples in the divinities. When an exceptional expert like the fifth god was completely suppressed by Yi Shiwen, these baby dragons simply didn't stand a chance against him. Yi Shiwen was basically invincible, and they would actually need a breakthrough to the third stage of Legendary Realm if they even considered giving him a good enough challenge. Yi Xiwen's big golden hand started to shrink in midair. It now appeared like a huge cage that had entrapped all those flood dragons. They simply had no way to escape from his clutches. Boom! Yi Shiwen suddenly closed his big golden hand, and more than 100 flood dragons were directly squeezed to death. Yi Shiwen was not at all hesitant in offering those flood dragons to the poisonous dragon water control flag and began to refine them one after another. To be continued. Chapter 315. Heavenly Tribulation appears again in comparison to a deep-water black serpent. A flood dragon's blood would undoubtedly be purer and superior in quality. Hence, if dragon blood was to be offered to the poisonous dragon water control flag, then its might would naturally grow much bigger. Yi Shiwen began to refine the corpses of baby dragons one after another, and kept on adding their essences into the flag array. It could be said that there was a huge difference between his current and previous strength levels. Even the degree of restoration of Tianyuan Mirror was quite significant this time, which was also the reason why the refining of poisonous dragon water control flag took only 1 day. This also included offering the blood of flood dragons to the flag, which ultimately led to the evolution of all deepwater black snakes into flood dragons. The wolf cub had been guarding Yi Shiwen during this period. He didn't even budge 1 step away from Yi Shiwen, since this dragon tomb was a dangerous place. Although they had obtained a lot of benefits here, there was still a possibility of encountering some unexpected situations, just like the sudden appearance of those flood dragons. If Yi Shiwen had not moved into action at the right time, then his team wouldn't have come out alive of that ambush. Yi Shiwen placed the flag back into his stock. Considering the enhanced power of poisonous dragon water control flag, it could be said that his strength had also increased multiple times. In fact, he would now be able to deal with the expert of Legendary Third Stage quite easily. After Yi Shiwen was done leveling up the flag, he and the others continued to venture deeper into the tomb. As they went deeper and deeper, they could feel the gradual rise in the intensity of Inchi as it was blowing against their faces and assaulting all their senses at once. Clusters of deadki could be seen surging high inside the hall, intertwining into layer upon layer of clouds. The entire hall seemed like it was built at the edge of some cloud district. They could also see a primitive-looking cavern on the other side of the thick deadki clouds. On the other side of the clouds, there was a seemingly endless pile of dragon skeletons lying on the floor. Each of the skeletons appeared like a small mountain. In fact, the original flood dragons used to be even bigger in stature. Not to mention that the real dragons were incomparably massive, almost rivaling the size of the stars. During their lifetime, dragons were known to possess supernatural powers to manipulate their own size. However, right now, their skeletons were lying motionless on the ground. I never thought that we would come across so many skeletons of the flood dragons. Was an entire group of flood dragons buried here? Yemo said. Taking a broad view ahead, there were thousands of skeletons of flood dragons in the dragon tomb. Some were small, while the others were larger in size. It could be said that these skeletons definitely belonged to a large ethnic clan of flood dragons, but now they all had perished completely. Perhaps those baby flood dragons were the last surviving members of the flood dragon clan which had already faced destruction, or they would have never left their precious tomb unattended. In fact, their sacred family tomb had been turned into the foundation of a martial arts school. Of course, there were no explanations behind the presence of all these ladders and halls inside the tomb, besides accepting the fact that the downfall of entire Flood Dragon clan had already taken place at an earlier date. Later on, the Wong Heavenly faction must have constructed its school here using this dragon tomb as foundation. But even they met with deterioration and complete downfall with the passage of time, leaving behind a bunch of ruins for others to explore. Since these dragons had died tens of thousands of years ago, their tyrannical bodies couldn't survive the impact of time. Even though they were such powerful creatures, their flesh and blood had long been absorbed into the ground, acting as nourishment for the spirit grasses, which had been growing in the vicinity for thousands of years. Only a mountain of snow-white skeletons had survived till now, still exuding an unusual white glow that hadn't disappeared for all those years. This was certainly a sign of successful cultivation, not to mention that even the skeletons of most inferior quality in the pile belonged to Sage Realm flood dragons. If alive, just one would be enough to spread chaos throughout the Ming Empire. We are really lucky. The wolf cub laughed and galloped towards the mountain of skeletons. The lingering traces of dragon power simply did not have any effect on him. Even though the flesh and blood of these flood dragons had dissipated into the earth, the precious dragon scales were still intact. Moreover, these scales could be turned into full-body armors and helmets. Their value was simply unquantifiable. In short, these dragon bones were priceless treasures. Rumble! The flood dragon skeletons began to shake suddenly along with the entire dragon tomb. A strange green light suddenly lit up in their empty eye sockets as these beasts of Sage Realm actually came back to life. Damn! Yemo suddenly said in a loud voice. It seems like this place still has the remnants of dragon souls which are bringing all these skeletons back to life. Some traces of consciousness were still left in these skeletons, which usually stayed in a latent state unless someone tried to rob their clan's tomb. The formidable race of dragons simply couldn't be underestimated no matter what. One after another, the dragon skeletons flew up in the air while issuing frightening roars. Dragon power began to rush wantonly in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, the dragon skeletons rushed towards Yi Shiwen and the others. The dragon skeletons were flying in the air and appeared just like dragon spirits. However, flesh and blood began to congeal out of nowhere, slowly and gradually filling their ghostly shadows. Their loud roars were shaking the world. "Let's get out of here! Hurry up!" Yemo shouted. There was no need to say that, since Yi Shiwen and the others had already begun speeding all the way to escape. Yi Shiwen had opened his devil wings behind his back to escape at an extremely fast speed. The Mo siblings escaped together and flew directly out of the cave. Although the wolf cub wasn't as fast as Yi Shiwen, he had started to run earlier than Yi Shiwen. The wolf cub's agility skill was amazing, and so was his speed. Yi Mo's warning was unnecessary because everyone already knew about the severity of situation. The resurrection of sage-level dragons was no joke. In fact, even the resurrection of the flood dragons of legendary 8th or 9th stage would be a terrible event. Even Yi Shiwen had to flee at the mere sight of sage-level dragon skeletons. They were dealing with dragon skeletons of Sage Realm, and that too more than one or two. One could easily imagine the tyranny of the situation. No wonder even the Wong Heavenly faction had been unable to lay their hands on these dragon skeletons, which had remained untouched for thousands of years in a huge hall located on the other side of Deadkey Clouds. The rattling sound of bones colliding with each other was accompanied by terrifying screams of the resurrected flood dragons, resounding everywhere inside the underground tomb. Both Yi Shiwen and Wolf Cub were afraid to turn their heads back, but couldn't help doing so. One thing was sure, they needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Whoosh! With a shrill, piercing sound, Yi Shiwen directly turned into a golden streamer of light and escaped from the underground tomb. The wolf cub closely followed him while escaping, and stopped only after having exited the underground tomb. At this time, he was breathing heavily. He was only a bit slower than Yi Shiwen, but almost had his back bitten by one of the dragon skeletons. That skeleton dragon's agility skill was not superior to that of the wolf cub, but its cultivation level was far above his. This was a clear demonstration of the saying, if you cannot run faster than the enemy, then at least run faster than your companion. These old fogies have died long ago. Why cannot they just stay dead? Jeez, they just had to come back to life and cause such ruckus. The wolf cub was still gasping for breath as he said these words in an irritated tone. The intermittent roars and screeches of those skeleton dragons could still be heard arising from inside the underground tomb. The peculiar screeches of these dead creatures reminded Yi Shiwen of those terrifying screams, which used to haunt the Demon Island every night. However, the skeleton dragons continued to pace back and forth near the entrance of the tomb, but did not dare to come out, because stepping out of the tomb would actually suppress their consciousness, turning them into nothing more than a pile of bones. Their responsibility was just to guard this place from strong raiders. As soon as they realized that Yi Shiwen and the others had already gone out of their reach, they could only roar bitterly a few times before returning to the depths of the tomb. It's such a pity. Those skeletons are priceless treasures, but the wolf cub said with a trace of regret appearing on his face. But we've obtained great benefits this time. Don't be greedy and learn to be satisfied with whatever you already have, Yi Shiwen said while indirectly referring to the priceless medicinal herbs. Well, I'm planning to take on the heavenly tribulation. You invoke a protective barrier around me, Yi Shiwen said. His cultivation had already reached the peak of half-step legendary realm's first stage, and including the non-stop massacre of demon beasts at his hands, which had continued for a period of half a month. His foundation had already reached a profound level, exceeding all basic requirements for a breakthrough. Not to mention, he had diligently studied the ancient scriptures for 2 whole weeks as well. He was only missing a turning point. In fact, he had noticed the need of having a breakthrough right before sacrificing the baby flood dragons to his flag, but he just wanted to finish the tomb exploration first. At present, he should be able to contend with the experts of legendary 3rd stage with the help of poisonous dragon water control flag. Hence, after having a breakthrough by successfully crossing the heavenly tribulation, he would be able to easily beat the experts of legendary 4th stage. At that time, his self-defense capabilities would also increase significantly. Choosing to cross the heavenly tribulation here was beneficial to Yi Shiwen, since the skeleton dragons couldn't step out of the tomb's entrance, while the heavy presence of dragon power in the vicinity kept the demon beasts away. In short, he could face the heavenly tribulation without worrying about being disturbed while doing so. In addition, the wolf cub was also going to use a protective barrier to isolate Yi Shiwen during the breakthrough process. With Yi Shiwen no longer concealing his true cultivation, His energy broke free and spread out. In the sky, the heavenly tribulation clouds started to gather slowly. At this time, he suddenly felt as if the heavenly tribulation had firmly locked onto his body. The dark clouds were getting denser and stronger, as the electric snakes suddenly began to shuttle back and forth across the clouds. Voila! There sounded a loud and shrill noise as the thunderclouds activated all of a sudden. Hundreds of electric snakes dived down from the clouds, rushing all the way towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! 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 A series of explosions occurred right above Yi Shiwen, as soon as those electric snakes pounded upon his divine clothing. Crash bang! At that very moment, there began a downpour of thunderbolts which crashed upon him one after another. Bang! 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 Those thunderbolts had crashed upon the gilded tyrant body of Yi Shiwen. To be continued. NT. Sorry guys for the slow release pace-off MGS recently. As part of the Novel Saga team, I have been busy making preparations to move MGS to the new Chidian International site, which also includes the retranslation of the first 16 chapters, already done. Those 16 chapters will soon appear on Chidian International's site along with all other chapters. Of course, you can expect regular and faster releases for MGS there, as well as for the other novels which are moving. For those who don't know, Novel Saga is moving MGS, OEM, and TTNH to Chidian International site as per their request. Chapter 316. Surrounded, although several thunderbolts bombarded on Yi Shiwen's body back-to-back, they still couldn't make him move even a hair's breadth. On the contrary, they had no other choice but to get completely absorbed by him. Apparently this time, the heavenly tribulation was somewhat impatient. It could no longer wait and immediately flooded the whole sky with innumerable lightning weapons, swords, spears, halberds, and so on. Altogether, 18 sorts of densely packed weapons were streaking across the sky, and just like a torrential rain, they directly fell upon Yi Shiwen. The might of each and every of these weapons was much higher than the previous thunderbolts, as if these weapons contained souls of their own. Their attack power was simply majestic as they set off endless waves of killing intention across the sky. A great number of weapons swept down from the sky like a huge storm. An exceptional terror was deeply associated with this scene. Boom! 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 As soon as these weapons crashed onto Yi Shiwen's body, the impact surprisingly produced intermittent bursts of metal-clanging sound. Previously, the heavenly tribulation had been unable to injure him, but this time, these lightning weapons not just rumbled on his body, but also blew open several bloody wounds on his body. However, Yi Shiwen immediately restored his wounds using the Heavenly Phoenix regeneration technique. This time, he did not dare to be negligent. He promptly started operating Tyrant Body technique so as to endure the barrage of impacts from these weapons, which were basically wreaking havoc upon his body nonstop. Mo's siblings were standing nearby, and simply staring at him in awe because if compared with Yi Zaiwen's previous heavenly tribulation which they had seen before, today's heavenly tribulation was 10 times more intense. The last heavenly tribulation was just like a nightmare in general, while this time's tribulation was not only much more dreadful, but also unpredictable. There was literally a downpour of weapons dropping unceasingly. Such a huge change going on inside the heavenly tribulation was dangerous enough to get them twisted into pieces. However, Yi Shiwen was still entirely calm and composed, although was being continuously hacked by those lightning weapons, and in pain. A very miserable look had already crawled on his face. Indeed, this time's heavenly tribulation had also failed to budge him even a bit. Even half an hour later, the heavenly tribulation still couldn't have the slightest effect on him. Therefore, it could only resentfully disperse in the end. However, Yi Zaiwen's imposing aura was more frightening than before, which completely engulfed his wounds and started to heal them gradually. Yi Shiwen breathed out with satisfaction as he finally entered the second stage of half-step legendary realm. Considering his current strength, he was now much more confident than ever. Now, Even the experts of the legendary Fourth Peak couldn't stand any chance against him. Yi Shiwen felt that now he had some strength for self-defense, but was pretty obvious that this was far from enough. But no matter what, it had already been beyond his control, so he needed a massive amount of Ling Dawn to cultivate. He had several techniques to practice, so the constant need of Ling Dawn couldn't be ignored. Although his Tianyuan mirror could condense Ling Dawn, the produced quantity was far from adequate. Moreover, they could continue to stay inadequate like this for a lifetime. The heavenly tribulation eventually dispersed, and since it had been crossed through by Yi Shiwen, the usual scenery of sandstorm had been replaced by a calm and tranquil sky without a shred of clouds across thousands of miles. Yi Shiwen looked towards the slowly approaching Mo siblings and the wolf cub, and said, "I have decided that I will wait for a while before leaving here, while you people continue staying here for at least 10 days before going out." This matter had already been properly discussed among them. In this group, Yi Shiwen was the strongest one while the strength of Mo's siblings was far inferior to his. So if they went along with Yi Shiwen, then would definitely become a huge burden for him. It would be better if Yi Shiwen left alone, because he wouldn't need to tend to 2 or more people at the same time. Even withdrawing in a dire situation would be easier for him. Furthermore, he would apportion the sword command she had seized from the fifth god amongst them, so that they could exit this small world anytime and anywhere using those sword commands. After having explained everything to them, Yi Shiwen immediately opened the gate of the ruins and went out. Yi Shiwen is here." The moment Yi Shiwen's figure appeared in their line of sight, the scouts of major forces instantly recognized him because his picture had long been spread throughout the major forces. Just one page of ancient god scriptures was worthy of sending any major force into frenzy. Several experts had arrived near the entrance to the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, and were continuing to come as well. Although Yi Shiwen had obtained merely one page of the god's ancient scripture, this news had still spread throughout the major forces, making countless people to direct their gazes over here. "It really is him, that's for sure. Hurry up and report. Today this kid is going to die," one of the scouts of a major power hastily said. Yi Shiwen is really stupid. Unless he hides there for a lifetime, it is absolutely impossible for him to evade the murderous chase of our army of God. Could it be that he thinks that just by hiding there for half a month, he would be able to escape this tragic fate? A member of the army of God coldly said. Suddenly, all sorts of summoning talismans soared in the sky, sending reports that Yi Shiwen had finally shown up after half a month. Yi Shiwen, they have already issued summoning talismans. Be prepared for a fierce battle, Yi Mo said. And Yi Shiwen nodded. He did not prevent these scouts from sending out the summoning talismans because there were too many of them, and he did not have the means to stop them all. It seemed like many forces were interested in obtaining the power of ancient god scriptures. Yi Shiwen die. A roar suddenly resounded throughout the sky. At this moment, the sky already had dozens of rainbow lights flitting across the sky, as if trying to delimit the sky into several parts. A few dozens of warriors were all floating in the air, constantly releasing an unscrupulous aura from their bodies. Besides, they were being led by several experts who were powerful enough to actuate the atmospheric Lingqi with a mere hand gesture. Yes, they actually the battle efficiency of legendary level. Amongst them, 2 experts especially possessed exceptionally tyrannical, imposing aura. One of them was roughly 27 or 28-year-old youth with divine-looking, gracious facial features, while his golden-colored robe was making his appearance look quite extravagant and classy. The person beside him looked more or less the same as him. This person's facial features were also quite gracious, making him look exceptionally attractive with a handsome face. He was clad in a long golden robe, but appeared a little younger than the previous one, roughly 25 or 26 years old. From the discussion of the surrounding people, Yi Shiwen could at least figure out this much, that one of these 2 men was the 3rd god, while the other one was the 4th god, both belonging to the army of God. To Yi Shiwen, the appearance of these 2 men and the previously met 5th god seemed very much alike, with almost the same temperament, as if they really were gods in general. And right behind them, there were dozens of breathtaking warriors, and each one of them was an invincible character of half-step legendary realm. One could tell that each of them was favored by the gods and held supreme dominance in their respective regions. Thus, the inside story of the existence of the army of God could be clearly inferred. Yi Shiwen swept his eyes around and noticed that there was the insignia of army of God on the bodies of these experts. It seemed like all forces of the army of God, which should have been dispersed throughout the Ming Empire, had concentrated here to encircle and annihilate Yi Shiwen. These super experts, who have the insignia of the army of God on their hands, are more than enough to flatten the major influences of Yangon City. But today, they have assembled to deal with Yi Shiwen. This is nothing. Actually, Yi Shiwen has beheaded the fifth god, and that thoroughly enraged the army of God. This has also triggered the anger of the high-level experts, who are now blazing with fury. Look at those two men who are leading the powerhouses of the army of God. Aren't they the fourth god and the third god? It is reported that the army of God has altogether 5 great gods, but there is a huge difference among them on the basis of their strength. Speaking of which, actually the fifth god was the weakest one, while the fourth god and the third god are far above the fifth god based on their respective strength levels. It is said that the second god and the first god have already left the Ming Empire for the Qin Empire. So now, the Ming Empire is left with only 3 gods. And since the fifth god was killed, third god has taken the task of sealing off the place, while the exploration of these ruins has fallen into the hands of the fourth god. In short, they have collectively started out on a trip, and perhaps this is not the so-called rage of the army of God. Are you Yi Shiwen? That 27 or 28-year-old youth asked. He was actually the third god who was coldly staring at Yi Shiwen at this moment. He held a very commanding position in his army. His facial features were solemn, while his stare was quite bone-chilling, as if was about to turn into a sharp sword to behead Yi Shiwen right here, right now. Yes. Yi Shiwen nodded. So you are the one who killed the fifth god. The fourth god gazed at Yi Shiwen with his heart-chilling sharp eyes, as if a ferocious beast had selected a human to devour till its heart content. In spite of being aware of Yi Shiwen's real identity as the killer of the fifth god, he still asked in an inquisitive manner. Yi Shiwen also had nothing to hide, so he slightly nodded in response. Good. The third god coldly glared at him. His face was expressionless, as it seemed as if he was looking at a dead man. Yi Shiwen was just like a tiny ant in front of him. Today, it would be very difficult for you to fly away from here even with your wings. So, if you have any last words to say, go ahead. The third god seemed very lenient when he said that, but was actually very cold and detached person in reality. That was why he talked about the death of the fifth god quite indifferently. Actually, the army of God had been established a long time ago, but nothing grave like this had ever happened since then. If the first and the second gods had not left the Ming Empire, then perhaps they would have personally moved into action. In his eyes, Yi Shiwen was already dead. So at present, the only thing he was concerned with was at what time Yi Shiwen would finally perish. Listen, Yi Shiwen, hand over the ancient god scripture to me, and we genie guards will guarantee your safety. At this time, a loud sonic boom resounded in the sky. It was followed by the arrival of a large fleet of warriors streaking across the sky. Dozens of warriors had arrived on the scene. They were all clad in the uniform of genie guards, and none of them appeared weaker than the members of the army of God. There were also a few legendary level experts among them, with each releasing intense killing intention in the vicinity. This group was quite eye-catching in a way. And the one on the front was the famous genie young master, whom Yi Shiwen had seen earlier. Yi Shiwen knew that this should be the master of genie guards. Yi Shiwen, hand over all of the items which you have obtained in the ruins, and you shall live. Genie young master said in a cold voice. He was quite pleased by the fact that Yi Shiwen had been surrounded and didn't seem to have any way out. Earlier, Yi Shiwen had been too strong and expert to deal with. In fact, even genie guards hadn't dared to face him. However, now that the tables had turned against Yi Shiwen, it was the perfect timing to ask him to surrender obediently. Genie guards, I never thought that so many of these experts would arrive here. Could it be that Genie Young Master has called backup from Yangon City, as well as from nearby cities? Exactly. That one page of ancient god scriptures is said to have alarmed the entire organization of genie guards. If there was enough time, then more genie guards are estimated to arrive. Encircled by both the army of God and genie guards, I am afraid it is really a dead end for Yi Shiwen this time around. Chapter 3:17. Yi Shiwen. You will die today for sure, and I will also make sure that by the time I am done with you, you will be left unable to even beg for your life. The fourth god tightly clenched his steel-like teeth, and his handsome face twisted fiercely. Actually, these 5 great gods had grown up together. They shared a close brotherly bond amongst themselves. To them, the news of a brother getting murdered by Yi Shiwen had been quite devastating. He simply wished in his heart to thoroughly destroy Yi Shiwen by crushing his bones to dust. Humph, don't be so full of yourself. There are several others who want to kill me, so you alone are nothing but inconsequential. Yi Shiwen sneered and said. One could see that both sides no longer cared to give face to each other. There was nothing that could ease them now. You are courting death. The fourth god was thoroughly enraged by Yi Shiwen's response. A long spear instantaneously appeared in his hand, and he immediately swept out a terrifying spearlight that rushed towards Yi Shiwen at a tremendous speed. It crossed the expansive sky, rippling along the way, while it seemed as if the world would be broken into pieces any time now. Many spies were present in the surrounding, and all of them held their breath in astonishment. They noticed that the fourth god actually had the strength of Half-Step Legendary Realm's 4th stage. Although he had recently stepped into the Half-Step Legendary Realm 4th stage, he wasn't even 50 years old. Even the old experts of 100 years of age and above were able to achieve barely Half-Step Legendary 4th stage or so. Hence, it could be seen that the strength and talent of the fourth god had already reached a considerably higher level. Even in the entire southern region, the experts with almost the same age as him couldn't achieve the same level as he had achieved. At this moment, Genie Young Master, who was standing nearby, also saw that, and it instantly stole away the color of his face, because he was only at Half-Step Legendary 3rd stage, and that too because he had recently consumed a piece of dragon essence. Actually, Genie Young Master was considered as a top genius, not only in the Ming Empire, but also in the entire southern domain. In fact, since his debut, he had always been at the top. When compared to the 5th god, he was not bad. However, compared with the 4th god, he actually fell short by a bit. Not to mention that he couldn't possibly be compared with the first 3 gods. Furthermore, there were other powerful forces like the 7-star lords on this ancient road. Such comparisons suddenly made it somewhat hard for him to accept his powerlessness, turning his face a bit gloomy. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. In a flash, a long halberd emerged in his hand. This halberd actually belonged to the 5th god. Yi Shiwen didn't even know the material used in its formation. At that time, when the battle between him and the 5th god had ended in the death of the latter, this halberd had surprisingly remained intact. Yi Shiwen brandished the halberd from his hand and instantly shot at Upinto the sky. It pierced through the sky to face the astonished Spurky that had been shot by the opposite party. Although Yi Shiwen's halberd technique was not profound, as it was not obtained as an extraordinary inheritance, yet the sheer might used by him in this halberd attack had more than compensated for all that. In fact, the power displayed by this halberd this time was far more terrifying than that by the 5th god. Previously, Yi Shiwen had stayed in the library for several months. There he had studied all sorts of martial techniques as well as the so-called avenues of the martial arts. Although he could not become proficient in all of them, his tyrannical strength was more than enough to balance out what was lacking. Bang! The golden beam of the halberd instantly collided maliciously into the majestic Spurky, causing a huge pressure that crushed the space. It resulted into an immense shock wave that set off energy storms in all directions. Ah, 5th brother! The moment the 4th god saw the long halberd in Yi Shiwen's hands, his eyes immediately turned red while his already fierce facial expression turned even more eerie. He gave out a loud bellow which vibrated throughout the surrounding space. An icy cold and piercing killing intention suddenly blasted out from his body and scattered everywhere. The experts present in the surroundings immediately felt this intense killing intention and quickly drew a few steps back. His killing intention was so frightening that some of the spies with comparatively weaker strengths felt as if they would be shattered into fragments. Yi Shiwen, I will strangle you to death. The fourth god shouted ferociously with a touch of callousness and arrogance in his tone. His chi enveloped the world itself just like a vast ocean and swept towards Yi Shiwen to engulf him completely. Die! The fourth god snarled aggressively, which shook the space before shattering it into pieces. His grandiose, imposing aura swept across and engulfed the surrounding area as he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. At that time, he looked exceptionally scary, like a mountain hurling towards Yi Shiwen. Get lost! Yi Shiwen also roared loudly. His golden divine cloak draped over his body instantly. He also started the operation of gilded tyrant form. He swept out his halberd, rocking the entire space in the vicinity. His chi engulfed the opposite party's imposing aura. The golden tide that he had swept out had already blotted out the entire sky. Boom! Both sides collided with each other in midair like two stars. In that split second, a large area in the surrounding space crumbled down while the dazzling light spread out in the horizon like millions of arrows made up of blade light, streaking across the sky at once. In the face of such a terrible collision, whether it was the army of God or genie guards, all withdrew as far as possible, so as not get swept away by the aftermath of this collision. Even though they were the leaders of their respective domains, this collision was too dreadful for them to withstand. Bang! After the collision occurred, the energy waves swept out and shattered the surrounding space, shocking everyone in the process. Just what kind of force was this attack comprised of that it led to such a terrible collision? Bang! A figure was instantly sent flying out of that group of dazzling light. Unexpectedly, it turned out to be the fourth god. The fourth god had released such an invincible, imposing aura only a while ago, but now his clothes were completely tattered while his hair was all messy. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Everyone's eyes shrank as they hadn't expected that the person who would be sent flying out like this would actually turn out to be the fourth god. Actually, that terrible explosion was caused by Yi Shiwen. Indeed, Yi Shiwen was extremely strong. However, Yi Shiwen didn't even wait for him to catch his breath and quickly leapt up, making his way through the space avalanche and rushed towards the fourth god. The Lingqi in the atmosphere had gone completely chaotic. The turbulent flow of Yi Ziwen's long halberd directly broke through this chaotic aura, and like a black flood dragon, it swiftly dashed towards the fourth god to bite him. Hey, stop! The third god was very much confident of his brother, but hadn't thought that during that horrifying collision, it would actually be the fourth god to fall into a disadvantageous position. Moreover, he was almost on the verge of being killed by Yi Shiwen. Sensing the situation, the third god immediately shot out a move that took the shape of a big hand and rushed toward Yi Ziwen's long halberd at a lightning speed. The third god was stronger when compared to the fourth god. He had almost stepped in a half-step legendary fifth stage. In fact, had he not received the news of the fifth god getting killed, he would have already stepped into the fifth stage after a closed-door training session. When I decide to kill someone, no one can save them. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. The situation had taken a turn where there was no room for reconciliation between him and the army of God. Now, it had become a matter of life and death for both sides. Either Yi Shiwen would kill them, or the army of God would kill him. All of a sudden, a blue vein burst open in Yi Ziwen's right hand as he pulled back the long halberd and instantly shot it towards the fourth god. The halberd darted forward, while absorbing the very soul of the expansive sky. Yi Shiwen had already reached the peak of the fourth layer of gilded tyrant form. Surely, one could imagine the sort of tyrannical force that he would have used to throw that halberd just now. Yi Shiwen swiftly turned around and shot out his palm. In a flash, a coiling dragon came out from his palm, raised its head upwards, and gave out a loud roar before soaring up into the sky. Then it immediately flew towards that big hand of the third god. Boom! The coiling dragon collided with the third god's big hand, which was made up of Ling Qi. Afterwards, it tore that big hand into shreds and flew towards the third god to gobble him up. At the same time, that long halberd which had transformed into a black flood dragon also galloped towards the fourth god. The experts of Army of God immediately moved into action. They absolutely could not allow the fourth god to be killed in front of them. They were thoroughly enraged when the fifth god had been killed in front of them, but now if the fourth god was to die before their eyes as well, then their faith would surely collapse. An expert of half-step legendary first stage directly went forward and stretched out his hand and made a futile attempt to grab that long halberd. Whoosh! The sound of the terrific friction was heard by everyone as the bones in his hand were shattered and blood began to ooze out from the wound. In fact, his whole body was affected by the terrifying force contained in that halberd. He fell down from the sky while the blood sprayed out from his body. However, his attempt had slightly delayed the advancement of the halberd. This gave opportunity to many experts to arrive in front of the halberd. Yet nothing could resist the tyrannical force of that halberd as it broke through all their defenses. Even the experts of half-step legendary second stage couldn't stop it and were directly reduced to a group of blood mist. This halberd was simply unstoppable. It took quite long to describe the entire scene, but all of this happened in just a moment. The halberd ultimately broke past the layers of experts and arrived in front of the fourth god. Pucci! The halberd pierced through the body of the fourth god and directly nailed him to the ground. Boom! As soon as his body was nailed to the ground by the halberd, his blood splattered out. It had directly crushed his soul before virtually crucifying him. He lost his life that very instant. The third god went crazy due to rage as he saw the death of the fourth god. Not to mention that it had happened right in front of him. This feeling was more heart-wrenching than the grief caused by the news of the fifth god's killing. After all, the fifth god hadn't been killed before his eyes, while the fourth god was killed right in front of him. Surely, this unbearable feeling had pierced his heart. Fourth brother! The third god bellowed as his fierce, imposing aura swept across in all directions. The third god ferociously roared. His eyes were bloodshot as he gradually walked towards Yi Shiwen while towing his long blade. Each and every one of his steps trod down the space, as his imposing manner was rising with each advancing step. An intense killing intention swept out towards Yi Shiwen to lock him down on the spot. Chapter 3:18. Bang! The earth trembled due to the might of the third god, and a golden light emitted from his body, which spread throughout the vast sky. All the spies of the major forces got stunned as their bodies were covered in cold sweat. The third god had not begun to attack yet, but his terrifying might had already swept over in all directions. Genie Young Master's face turned pale as he stepped back. He considered himself as the top disciple of the younger generation, but the fourth god, who was already at the half-step legendary fourth stage, had died in the hands of Yi Shiwen. This indicated that Yi Shiwen was even fiercer than the fourth god. However, this third god was even more powerful than the fourth god. A formidable breath swept across the surroundings. Now there simply was no means for anyone to approach him. For a formidable master like him to use his full power against this young genius was already a matter of joke. Yi Shiwen die. The third god clenched his steel-like teeth and squeezed out these few words before rushing towards Yi Shiwen in a flash. The golden Jin Yuan rushed out from his body and turned into a sea of golden energy before surging towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's golden body also emitted a large amount of golden Jin Yuan, which similarly swept towards the third god. Bang! The golden divine energies collided, and while looking from afar, it seemed as if two oceans made of gold had collided. The frightening shock waves swept all over the sky, and both of them stepped upon their respective sea of gold and ferociously pounded into each other. Two long blades hit each other, and a monstrous storm swept across everywhere. It seemed as if the space itself would collapse any time now. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura surged up once again, and his golden clothes flared up. Finally, Yi Shiwen didn't hold back and went all out, releasing the entirety of his strength of half-step legendary second stage in one go, by relying on all sorts of secret techniques. Yi Zaiwen's intrepid strength was simply beyond anyone's imagination. Puff! In the third god's hand, the web between the thumb and the forefinger cracked open and blood splashed out. The entire blade was stained with blood. Yi Shiwen also felt a giant force pounding into his own body as the long blade hit him. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest, but immediately felt it disappearing. Although the third god was very strong, only a tiny step away from entering the half-step legendary fifth stage, his overall strength was not less than that of Yi Shiwen. However, his body was not as strong as Yi Zaiwen's, hence his attack couldn't injure Yi Shiwen. What? Was the third god injured just now? A chill ran inside everyone's backs. The third god had obtained fame at a very early age, even before stepping on this ancient road. Earlier, people in the Ming dynasty did not know him, but after he had stepped on this ancient road, no one could injure him, even among his peers. There really was no such master who could hurt him. However, that same third god had been injured today. It was not because of any trick or conspiracy. It was a fair battle between two equally strong fighters, and the third god had actually been defeated by Yi Shiwen. The wounds on the third god's hands healed rapidly, leaving only the scars behind. A formidable master like the third god obviously had some kind of healing technique in his arsenal, although much inferior to the Phoenix regeneration technique, yet good enough to deal with such small wounds. The third god held the long blade in his hands and stared at Yi Shiwen with a cold look in his eyes. His icy gaze made everyone tremble with fear as his long blade was pointed at Yi Shiwen. You are very strong. No wonder fifth brother and fourth brother have died in your hands, but today you are doomed. You cannot escape from my hands. The third god sneered and said. The third god had great self-confidence, and his self-confidence arose from his strength. His strength was enough to dominate the young generation, and even when compared to the experts who were more than 100 years old, he was not that bad. The cold tip of the blade burst into a frightening radiance, overflowing with murderous intention. The third god raised his long blade and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in the blink of an eye. The blade instantaneously slashed towards Yi Shiwen. It was an invincible blade technique, and no one could guess from where he had obtained this inheritance. It seemed as if the blade would cut the world, as if it would cut through the very flow of time. Yi Shiwen laughed coldly as the long blade danced in his hands again, emitting a bright moonlight in the sky, which took the shape of a beautiful moon diagram. It was as bright and dazzling as the sun. The two long blades collided again. The third god's blade and Yi Zaiwen's full moon creative concept banged maliciously into each other, setting off burning hot rays of light in all directions. Bang! Both the third god and Yi Shiwen had put all their effort into this attack and were exhausted. As a result of this time's collision, both of them had their hands injured. People were watching from afar with their eyes wide open. They could tell that this time's collision was more ferocious than the one from a moment ago. Yi Shiwen, you cannot waste time, Yi Mo said suddenly. As time passes, more and more masters will come. Now it's only the army of God and the genie guards with whom you have to fight. But if they are grouped together with other forces, you will not be able to deal with them. And what if an old monster shows up? Then, even with the devil wings, you will not be able to escape. Yi Zaiwen's heart shook, because since the time he had come out, he had been trying to escape. However, the army of God and the genie guards had blocked his way so that he couldn't escape. He did not have time to waste here, and since the words about him coming out of the small world had already spread out, more and more masters would continue to arrive here. At that time, even if really wanted to escape, he would most likely fail to do so. The look in Yi Zaiwen's eyes was getting colder and colder. The third god must be killed quickly, otherwise the consequence could be disastrous. As far as the genie young master was concerned, Yi Shiwen simply couldn't care less. Although the genie guards were considered as a monstrous presence in the Ming dynasty, they were also the personal guards of the emperor. There were a large number of experts in the capital city, but only some of them could be mobilized in this peripheral region, with the strongest among them being at half-step legendary 4th stage. In fact, the strength of these experts was almost comparable to that of the 4th god. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen was presently dealing with the 3rd god, so he couldn't possibly be bothered by the likes of them. Certainly, if he continued to stay here for longer, the genie guards from other places would gather here, and at that time, the situation would be different. Thankfully, genie guards didn't have their main forces readily available in the nearby regions. Therefore, the 3rd god must be killed as quickly as possible. The long blade in Yi Zaiwen's hand released a strong beam of light. His left hand issued an enormous aura as the Han seal appeared in his hand. Yi Zaiwen's facial expression turned from ice-cold to merciless. He had made up his mind to slaughter the 3rd god, hence there was no hesitation in his heart, and neither was he going to hold himself back. This scene was just too terrifying, as the empty tie itself was taking shape at this time. The 3rd god's complexion changed for the worse, as this was the first time his usual dignified countenance had fallen under the wind, but he still didn't lose his confidence. His dignified demeanor had been shaken by the unexpected win of Yi Shiwen a while ago. Although he would not admit it, his confidence had been thoroughly shaken for a moment. Yi Shiwen waved the long blade in his hands, but this time, it didn't appear to pierce the sky like usual. It was a rather mediocre slash, as it seemed as if an old man had barely managed to wave the blade in his hands. The blade attack directly cut its way through the sky to descend upon its target. However, the 3rd god couldn't interpret even the slightest bit of meaning that was hidden in Yi Zaiwen's attack. The long blade appeared quite slow, but in reality, it was moving very fast, and had almost arrived in front of the 3rd god. The 3rd god's hair fluttered frantically as the sharp blade wind blew against him. The 3rd god's reaction was full of resentment, as he no longer dared to look down on Yi Shiwen. As soon as Yi Shiwen was ready to launch his attack, the 3rd god had also prepared an attack of his own. Clang! Soon, a melodious metal clanging sound resounded everywhere, appearing to be disseminating from the prehistoric times after having crossed the river of time. This strike appeared rather mediocre, and there was nothing strange about it either. But the blade wind it swept out was incomparably sharp. Puff! Blood splashed out from both of their bodies as they had been simultaneously struck by blade winds. The ice-cold blade wind had torn open their flesh. Even the so-called tyrant body of Yi Shiwen had been sliced open almost instantly by the blade wind. Yi Zaiwen's wounds were a few inches deep and few feet in length. He had received terrible wounds all over his body. However, the 3rd god's condition was even more miserable than Yi Zaiwen's, since his body was not as strong as that of Yi Shiwen. Hence the blade wind had caused deeper injuries on his body, reaching all the way to his bones. Yi Shiwen sneered, and suddenly, the Phoenix regeneration technique started repairing his wounds. The 3rd god was also restoring the wound on his body, but the healing rate was far less than that of Yi Zaiwen's. Although his wounds had started to heal as well, it was nothing like the way Yi Shiwen had healed his wounds within a few breaths' time. Not just that, his battle strength had also been restored to the peak. Die! Yi Shiwen roared as his whole body appeared like a vast ocean, as if rushing forward to topple the mountains and overturn the seas. With a burst of golden energy beneath his feet, Yi Shiwen instantly unleashed his long blade and rushed towards the 3rd god. Although the 3rd god had not yet recovered, he just didn't have a way out of this precarious situation because Yi Shiwen had already attacked. At this time, Yi Shiwen went all out. Since the 3rd god was already wounded, it was important to kill him off once and for all. Bang! Summoned by the Han seal, a huge mountain took shape in the sky all of a sudden and fell directly upon the 3rd god. Bang! The 3rd god got smashed as his flesh and blood splashed out everywhere. His left hand, which he had used to block the incoming attack, was completely broken. Chapter 319. The battle between both the sides took a tragic turn, and the 3rd god's flesh was split open. However, even Yi Shiwen was not in a good condition, as the third god's long blade had caused severe wounds on his body from which blood was spilling out. The attacks from both the sides had caused cuts and bruises on their bodies. However, none of them were ready to step back. The third god had lost his two brothers in the hands of Yi Shiwen and hated him for that. Also, Yi Shiwen eagerly wanted to get out of that place at any cost. It didn't matter to him whether he got hurt or had to hurt in order to escape. Meanwhile, Yi Zaiwen's Phoenix regeneration technique began to operate frantically. The loud cries of phoenixes could be heard coming from his body. Finally, his strength was restored to the peak. He slashed with his blade, and the full moon creative concept was displayed in the sky before it began to descend upon the vast earth. It seemed as if the laws of the world itself were turning upside down. Although the third god's flesh was split open, he was still as brave as ever. With immense hatred in his heart for Yi Shiwen, he swept his blade out, displaying his blade skill at its utmost. It was obvious that no other expert of half-step legendary fourth stage would have been able to survive this attack except Yi Shiwen. And if it was not for Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical body and Phoenix regeneration technique to aid him, perhaps even he would have been chopped down already by the third god's blade attack. However, because of this, it was very important to kill him within the shortest span of time. Therefore, Yi Shiwen could not afford to drag on any longer. Both of them had to kill each other's conviction mercilessly. Their blades had pierced into each other's bodies and blood was gushing out from the wounds. The situation was so tragic that everyone had held their breaths. Was it possible that if they had exchanged their places, they would have blocked this kind of attack? Actually, these two were not merely fighting, but they were fighting to kill each other. The scene made everyone feel a chill running down their spine. However, in the end, Yi Zaiwen's Phoenix regeneration technique began to operate miraculously, and in an instant he reached his peak condition. The third god soon fell into a disadvantageous position. His body was not as powerful as the tyrannical body of Yi Shiwen. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen had been constantly maintaining his combat strength at its peak. Moreover, because of the continuous collisions, the third god had already been severely injured, and the increasing gap between their battle efficiencies was now visible to everyone. Yi Shiwen instantly broke through the space and rushed towards the third god like a powerful golden tide, as if to engulf everything. The long blade held in Yi Zaiwen's hand suddenly turned into a golden dragon, which then soared along with the golden tides. Yi Shiwen tried to give the third god a fatal blow so that he could score the winning point. The third god also had some kind of healing technique. Although his technique was inferior to the Phoenix regeneration technique, the recovery rate was not very slow. Right now, they were basically competing on their respective ability to regenerate. Undoubtedly, Yi Shiwen had the advantage in the healing technique, so he did not give any opportunity to the third god to stand up and fight back, and gave him the final blow. The third god's body was completely drenched in blood, but there was still a cold expression on his face. With immense hatred in his heart, he stared at Yi Shiwen and crazily rushed towards him. Boom! Once again, a terrific collision took place. The collision set off golden waves which then swept out numerous storms in a circular manner, as if to engulf everything around it. Clang! Soon the sound of metal clanging could be heard, as the third god waved his long blade toward Yi Shiwen and directly shattered the space in the process. This was a ferocious battle which caused the blood to drip everywhere from their bodies. It was really a tragic battle. Yi Shiwen looked coldly at the third god as the long blade continued to dance in his hands. Stop! At this time, from the other side, the genie young master was watching the battle. He was concerned with the battle not because he had good intentions or anything, but because he had seen the terror of Yi Shiwen. And if he would let Yi Shiwen kill the third god, then Yi Shiwen definitely would turn toward them after that. Therefore, he had no option other than rescuing the third god at this time. All the members of the genie guards, one after another, charged towards Yi Shiwen, and along with them, the remaining masters of the army of God also rushed towards him. Perhaps a group of half-step legendary realm or legendary realm experts together might not be able to kill Yi Shiwen, but at least they must stop him from killing the third god. as everyone knew that only the third god could compete with Yi Shiwen, and once he was dead, they would completely lose their hope. Boom! 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 Numerous attacks swept towards Yi Shiwen, but none of them could hurt him. Suddenly, a red curtain appeared around him, and those attacks could not damage his body even a bit. This clearly was the effect of Tianyuan Mirror. Yi Shiwen directly rushed toward the third god. At this time, his golden robe was completely drenched in blood, and the wounds on his body were spilling blood in all directions. Perhaps, in his expeditions of all those years, this was the first time when the third god had been beaten so miserably. Even among his peers, no one could hurt him to this extent. And even when he used to fight with the first and the second god, definitely not to kill, he still had never been defeated so miserably. Yi Shiwen swept out his long blade, and although it looked slow, it was very fast in reality. And in the blink of an eye, it appeared right in front of the third god. The third god didn't have his long blade, and he could not block the attack without it. Neither could he compete with Yi Zaiwen's tyrannical body. Therefore, it was simply impossible for him to resist. Puchi! Yi Zaiwen's long blade without any hindrance directly cut the third god into two halves. His blood splashed out, and pieces of his bones fell from the sky. Finally, the famous third god had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Everyone who saw the battle was stunned. They could not believe that the third god had lost the battle, and not only just lost, but had actually been killed by Yi Shiwen. This was not the same as everyone had expected. In their imagination, the third god should have easily defeated Yi Shiwen, because if Yi Shiwen was the rising star in the world of martial arts, then the third god had remained famous for many years. But the reality was something else. Such a famous master had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he had been run over by the absolute strength of Yi Shiwen. There was no planning or schemes involved in the battle. He was killed just because Yi Shiwen was more powerful than him. So, did that mean the third god was not strong? No, he was strong. However, even an expert of half-step legendary fourth stage like him could not be the opponent of Yi Shiwen, and died without being able to stop even a move. Such a strong man had been killed by Yi Shiwen had been reduced to a pile of bones. And in addition to this, a strong image of Yi Shiwen had spread in the outside world. Many people's hearts shivered. They witnessed the defeat of a top master of the younger generation who was killed and defeated terribly and did not have even a bit of luck by his side throughout the battle. The road of martial arts was very cruel. On this road, the geniuses were like ants, and even the so-called peerless genius was only a bit stronger than the rest of ants. One could always come across formidable masters and the peerless rivals, who were always eager to excel. These reasons clearly indicated how much difficult it was to tread on this road. Suddenly, a burst of cold wind blew, setting off an endless bloody atmosphere in all directions. Yi Shiwen breathed heavily for a few times. His phoenix regeneration technique began to operate frantically, and his countenance again turned to normal. All the wounds on his body healed, and it seemed as if he was not at all hurt in the battle. Now, you are next. Yi Shiwen sneered, and looked toward the genie guards and the remaining members of Army of God. The spies of other major forces were in shock. They had seen how Yi Shiwen killed the two gods, and now they were guessing that, could it be that Yi Shiwen would also take down the genie guards in one stroke? Was he planning to completely infuriate the genie guards? The genie guards were unable to believe that Yi Shiwen would actually do such a thing in the illustrious Ming Empire. But for Yi Shiwen, genie guards were simply nothing. Since the two parties had no consideration to give face to each other, there was no scope left for hesitation. War! 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 Yi Zaiwen's long blade was brandished directly towards the genie guards. It turned into a magnificent blade light, forming a dazzling curtain of blades which killed all of them one by one. This blade attack was so magnificent that it suppressed the world itself. The sword in tension ran amok and shattered the space. Moreover, the people who had come to kill Yi Shiwen weren't weak as well. Most of the half-step legendary realm supermasters could be said to have their own heritage and means. However, The genie guards who had surrounded Yi Shiwen could be described as a group of ordinary masters concentrated at one place, with the formidable masters out of the picture. But it was of no use, as Yi Shiwen had suppressed their morale. It was not hidden from anyone that his tyrannical, gilded body was incomparable, and with all his strength, he rushed towards the genie guards. Pucci, an expert of half-step legendary second stage, was directly split into two halves by Yi Shiwen. His body parts fell from the sky as his blood splashed out. Tianyuan mirror appeared over Yi Zaiwen's head and slid down a curtain of scarlet light in order to protect Yi Shiwen from the attacks of the genie guards. Now, their attacks could not hurt him even a bit. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen immediately chased the genie young master, while the genie guards were trying to block his way. The genie young master was the real culprit, so it was impossible that Yi Shiwen would let him escape. The genie young master saw Yi Zaiwen's attack coming and immediately waved the mountains and rivers fan with his hand. It exploded a huge mountain of energy, which advanced towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly and soon unleashed his long blade. He slashed with his blade, and it directly cut the mountains and crashed into the chest of Genie Young Master. It directly cut into his chest all the way to his ribs and opened a huge wound, from which the blood began to gush out. He was in very grim state right now. The Genie Young Master screamed and immediately retreated. However, how could Yi Shiwen let the enemy go? So, he immediately chased after him. At this time, the genie guards arrived one after another to the rescue of their young master. After all, Genie Young Master was considered as a supreme existence among them. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's figure directly crashed into the group of approaching genie guards, and an expert was immediately killed by him. Yi Zaiwen's Bladiki swept out, and another legendary realm master of the genie guards was cut into two halves. Chapter 320. Clang! Soon the metal clanging sound could be heard as blade light rushed toward the expert of the army of God. It seemed as if it was cutting its way through the sky before it actually chopped an expert into two halves. Yi Zaiwen's blade suddenly released huge amount of energy, which swept away the warriors. The battle between them could only be described as tragic, and none of them were holding their hands. Both of them were looking to kill each other. Yet another one has died. Among the spies of major forces, many masters heard the news of Yi Shiwen killing a legendary realm master. It made them hold their breath. Certainly, the death of a legendary master in the Ming dynasty was discouraging for all other masters. However, even the masters of such level were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen, as they continued to fall prey to him and fell one after another from the sky like a bunch of dumplings from a pot. One must not forget that a master of half-step legendary realm was not like a plant which could be cut so easily. However, Yi Shiwen killed such an expert with ease. Go to hell! At this time, the only remaining expert of the army of God, who was at half-step legendary second stage master, burned his own life energy and suddenly broke through to the half-step legendary third stage. After that, he immediately rushed toward Yi Shiwen. Bang! An explosion took place as that expert laid out his palm and released out a huge, rolling mountain of energy, shattering the space in the process. Yi Shiwen used his glowing golden hands to directly tear apart that huge mountain of energy. Yi Zaiwen's big hand found its way to that expert of army of God and pounded on his body. Bang! His bones were broken as his mangled body fell from the sky. Although his body was not weak, it was nothing in front of Yi Zaiwen's palm strength that contained the tyrannical might of gilded tyrant form. Therefore, he simply couldn't sustain the blow. Kill! The murderous intent could be seen in their bloodshot eyes, and it seemed as if the entire sky would collapse at once. It was like the sky and the earth were turning upside down, as if it were a scene from the time when the creation of the universe had taken place. Yi Zaiwen's complexion remained the same. He had only one thing in his mind, and that was to get rid of this farce and escape as soon as possible. Everyone got stunned after watching the killing intent in Yi Zaiwen's eyes. Yi Zaiwen's body was strong enough to sustain the attack of even the master of half-step legendary second stage. And the attacks from those masters of half-step legendary realm and half-step legendary second stage simply could not hurt him. With the might of gilded tyrant form, even one strike of a palm could slice off a mountain. Right now, Yi Shiwen had a golden appearance, with golden energy surging in and around his body. Bang! Finally, even the last master of the genie guards failed to escape from the hands of Yi Shiwen, and was reduced into a pile of bones in the blink of an eye. And now, only the seriously injured genie young master remained. However, at this time, no one could put a check on the casualties of the masters of genie guards and the army of God. Today, those spies of the major forces clearly got to see an apocalyptic scene. After this war, Yi Shiwen would definitely become famous. In addition to this, he was sure to be ranked among the top masters of the younger generation. The last remaining expert's body exploded as it splashed out. It was like a rain of blood from the sky. So terrible, this Yi Shiwen is extremely frightening. He has not only killed 3 gods of the army of God, but even the genie young master would probably die at his hands. This time, Yi Shiwen has really pierced the heaven. Yes, but I'm afraid that the genie guards would be really furious after this. I wonder why their deputy commander has not arrived yet. Well, I am more curious about his inheritance. Don't tell me it is as hard to deal with as that one page of the ancient God scriptures. I can tell that his fortuitous encounters are not limited to that one page of ancient God scripture, as he can simply restore his strength and wounds continuously using some kind of secret technique, which is something far more important than that one page of ancient God scripture. Yes, and his body as well. I do not believe that his body is naturally that tough. He has definitely used some kind of method to toughen his body. He is just like a moving treasure trove, and once news about it spreads out, he will not have a single peaceful day in his lifetime. Hey, in fact, each and every one of these gods' favored geniuses experience fortuitous encounters in their life, but no one gets to know what kind of treasures they obtain in the end. However, the most important thing is that Yi Shiwen has bullied other people, and especially those who have strong backings. It is said that he belongs to a small sect from one of the 10 southeastern countries. Isn't he an ideal choice for bullying? To emerge from such a small place of the southeastern region and have such a combat power is purely a matter of talent, which can stun the world. And if he doesn't fall in the future, he will definitely become one of the top masters of the southeastern region. However, it's not easy to survive on this road, as this road is famous as the road of death. In the last many years, many geniuses have fallen on this road. Each and every inch of this road is literally paved with the bones of the fallen geniuses. In order to enhance one's cultivation by leaps and bounds, these geniuses would only get a time frame of a year. Of course, only the so-called exceptional geniuses could walk on this road and strive to grow powerful. Yi Shiwen instantly arrived in front of Genie Young Master and released huge amounts of golden Jin Yuan, dazzling the entire sky in the process. In the sky, there appeared a huge Han seal, which was in the shape of a massive mountain. Immediately after that, this huge mountain of energy swept down towards Genie Young Master. Bang! Genie Young Master's body was smashed down, and he fell down from the sky. Finally, Genie Young Master had also died in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Boy, you have courted death. As soon as Yi Shiwen killed the Genie Young Master, a loud sonic boom transmitted from the horizon, and a huge hand advanced towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Xiwen's was startled in his heart, and he immediately opened his devil wings and dodged to one side in order to avoid getting struck by that attack, which could have killed him in one blow. Boom! That big gasified hand instantly pounded on the ground and left a big handprint on it. It was an unusually terrifying scene. Yi Shiwen, you must hurry up and get out of here. Yi Mo shouted immediately. Now the enemy is still far away from us. If they manage to catch up with us, you would be in big trouble. Yi Shiwen nodded, then immediately flapped his golden devil wings and flew straight towards the horizon like a streamer of golden light. It seemed from the attack that the enemy was at least an expert of profound, legendary realm. Yishiwen was definitely not his opponent. If this enemy's attack from so far away could be this terrifying, if they managed to get close to Yishiwen, then he would certainly be in big trouble. At this time, the Ming Empire was in a state of turmoil. The death of the three gods and the Jin young master had added fuel to the fire. It seemed as if everyone had suddenly turned furious. All three gods had been killed off in one breath, and even the Jin young master, who had been specifically trained by genie guards, had died a pitiful death in battle. These two forces comprised of a total of 200 people, and none of them were ordinary experts. Many of those were actually the so-called extraordinary sons, coming from thousands of prestigious clans of the Ming dynasty. Although the masters of the army of God were not so famous, they still had several young rising stars under the age of 50, who had managed to reach half-step legendary realm and even legendary realm. In other places, such a genius would be given utmost importance, but here, he was obscured in the dazzling rays of so many geniuses. While considering small countries like the 10 countries of Southeast region, an army comprising of such combat power would be enough to wipe out an entire country. However, even the masters of such caliber had died in the hands of Yishiwen. Yishiwen used to be a famous expert earlier, but he became well known on this road after beating the fifth god. However, even after that, his fame remained limited in the vicinity of Yangon City. However, even in the vicinity of Yangon City, his fame remained quite short-lived. In fact, for a majority of people, he was simply nothing. However, also for a person like Yi Shiwen to kill hundreds of experts of half-step legendary realm and legendary realm alike was a great achievement. Suddenly, Yi Zaiwen's name spread everywhere in the Ming Empire. Did you hear what happened to that domineering army of God? Out of the 5 great gods, 3 are already dead. Moreover, all 3 of them died in the hands of the same person. These 5 gods used to be the top masters of the younger generation, and Yi Shiwen unexpectedly killed 3 of them in one go. Don't you feel that this Yi Shiwen is really going against the heavens' will? I must say that this guy has established his position among the top players of the younger generation. For a moment, everyone was a bit concerned and was talking about this fierce young master. As everyone had expected, the army of God and the genie guards issued an arrest warrant for Yi Shiwen. They declared that whoever would catch Yi Shiwen would get a lot of rewards. Army of God had gone out of its way to announce that as long as Yi Shiwen was killed, they would not inquire about the ancient God scriptures. Though nobody took the Army of God's declaration seriously. After all, if anyone were to kill Yi Shiwen, then they would undoubtedly keep the ancient God scripture for themselves. However, with this announcement, at least no one would need to worry about the consequences of seizing the ancient God scriptures from Yi Shiwen, because the army of God would not come looking for trouble. Suddenly, several forces joined together to catch Yi Shiwen. Apart from the genie guards and the members of the army of God, many other small and large forces were trying to encircle Yi Shiwen so that they could get their hands on the legendary ancient God scriptures. It was not a secret that one could use this treasure to enhance one's cultivation by a step. These people were part of the Ming Empire. In fact, some forces of other empires had also turned up in the Ming Empire to catch Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen had the ability to elude, it was difficult for him to remain invisible for a long time. Yi Shiwen killed a large number of experts for 3 whole days, but on the 3rd day, he was ambushed by the genie guards in a small town. After a protracted battle, Yi Shiwen escaped again after having murdered all of the experts who had encircled him. 10 days later, Yi Shiwen was ambushed by a group of Dongchang experts. However, he continued to kill those experts one after another, though he sustained a serious head injury when he was struck by an enemy in his head. In the end, he managed to escape from there, but with severe injuries. Chapter 3:21. After the head injury caused by Dongchang's expert, Yi Shiwen had disappeared for a total of 3 months. However, 3 months later, he resurfaced and was again intercepted by one of the experts of genie guards. This time, the genie guards had sent an expert who was actually at small complete legendary realm. He had personally led a group of experts to encircle and kill Yi Shiwen. But in the end, he himself was actually killed by Yi Shiwen. After this incident, Yi Shiwen had really stirred up the whole country. He was also being considered as the most talented figure of the younger generation now, just like the first god, the second god, and others. Not just that, many people also felt that in the entire southern region, he could now be ranked among the first-class experts. After having killed and beheaded a lot of experts of genie guards, wherever Yi Shiwen went, he kept on killing all the way. It could be said that the way to his destination had become a bloody battle for him. Even several people from other empires also started coming over, especially to seize the ancient god scriptures from him. Some of them were above the level of small complete realm. So, for Yi Shiwen, escaping their murderous chase had almost become like a fight-to-death situation. He even bumped into the deputy commander of genie guards once. He was a very terrifying person of half-step sage realm. And this particular war contributed greatly to the rising popularity of Yi Shiwen all across the country. However, people actually looked askance regarding his combat strength because although he could not turn out victorious in that fight, he still fought to death before managing to escape. Even though that war was seen by countless people, where they also saw a very dreary scene of how Yi Shiwen was split into two halves. However, in the end, he successfully escaped from the hands of an expert of half-step sage realm. This was sufficient enough to suddenly send his fame skyrocketing all around. Even those who weren't in his favor, they also admitted that he was indeed a ridiculously strong opponent in the younger generation. Furthermore, it had also become publicly known that Yi Shiwen might have practiced an unparalleled body refining technique, because the body of an average expert couldn't withstand attacks repeatedly. Even if an expert of half-step legendary 7th or 8th stage was to suffer attacks from an expert of half-step sage realm, he would be thoroughly annihilated. Yi Shiwen's insanely tyrannical body was enough to baffle so many people. And this news also became the reason for him being chased by many forces. In addition to this, the rumors about that one page of ancient god scriptures as well as the ancient body refining technique spread everywhere. And many also spread the rumor that Yi Shiwen had a supreme restoration type power technique. This also stirred up many people as they literally went berserk. In this process, several top masters of the young generation had also tried to dig out information about Yi Shiwen's whereabouts so as to capture him along with his treasures. However, not only were they all eventually butchered by Yi Shiwen, they also helped in further raising Yi Shiwen's popularity all the more. After having escaped from a half-step sage realm expert, Yi Shiwen had already gotten close to true martial university, and that also in just 1.5 months. A large number of experts of the younger generation had eventually concluded their trips and were rushing to Team U in large groups. Tianhui City was located in the Qin Empire, but it was actually not managed by the Qin administration. Standing erect on this piece of land, this city had already amassed a history of 10,000 years. This kind of long-established history was enough to give people goosebumps. As for the origin of Tianhui City, no one could say anything clearly about it, but it was reported that the person who laid its foundation was a great personage. Besides, it was also said that a disciple of TMU had founded it 10,000 years ago. Even though Tianhui City was in the territory of Qin Empire, it was a very big and lively city. It was also located at the confluence of 3 ancient roads in the Qin Empire. And after passing through this convergence point, if one continued along the road, then one would soon reach true martial city. This was also the prime objective behind Yi Shiwen's coming to Tianhui City, because this was the only city he could now take a break in. Although he was away from the Ming Empire for the last 2 months, and presently was in the Qin Empire, the news that he possessed exceptional secret techniques had widely spread everywhere. These 3 ancient roads were no exception either. Therefore, the idea of snatching the ancient scripture from him was not just limited to the Ming Empire, because the Qin Emperor had also stated his desire to obtain that page of ancient god scripture. In the event of Yi Shiwen setting his foot in any of the cities of the Qin Empire, he would be immediately chased down, and this road precisely turned out to be the most brutal place for him. Although he had been having fortuitous encounters repeatedly, the entire journey had remained filled with dangers as well. However, if it hadn't been the case, it would have been impossible for him to gain such huge benefits during this past year. If anyone would see Zywin's present appearance, he would instantly notice that his forehead had started graying along with the appearance of wrinkles. And though he was still dressed in battered clothes, his overall appearance had definitely changed a lot. This was in fact the side effect of Phoenix regeneration technique. During this entire journey, Yi Shiwen had experienced so many bloody battles that he could not even reckon all of them. It could be said that he had been killing all the way. There were several people who craved for the ancient god scriptures, but one after another, all had been killed by Yi Shiwen. Plenty of times, Yi Shiwen had escaped death, especially the last time when he had barely escaped from an expert of half-step sage realm. That time, he had almost died. Those who hadn't faced the terrifying power of such an expert would never understand it. However, thanks to this fight, he had caught the attention of the Qin Empire's powerhouses. And as a consequence, they were scared away just based on the thought that if such a great expert of half-step sage realm couldn't harm Yi Shiwen, then how could they possibly stand any chance? This way, Yi Shiwen had managed to avoid such a disaster. Even so, his body had almost been cracked into pieces, and if it were not for Yi Mo who towed him away with the help of Tianyuan Mirror, he probably wouldn't have survived. The devil wings had been imparted to him by Yi Mo, so he could naturally escape very fast on his own as well. Before the experts of Qin Empire could show up to capture Yi Shiwen, they needed to escape from there as quickly as possible. At that time, it was Yi Mo who had moved into action and quickly dragged Yi Shiwen along to escape. Only in that one battle, it could be said that almost 10 people were killed and there never was any possibility of their survival. However, Yi Shiwen had to rely on Phoenix regeneration technique to survive, though it ended up imparting him with his current appearance of someone who was suffering from premature aging. It was just a 20-year-old's appearance, but his forehead was already graying and the life essence within his body had started showing the signs of depletion. This was the so-called side effect of overusing Phoenix regeneration technique. Even if Yi Shiwen was under the clutch of such a big side effect, he was still as enthusiastic as before. This was not enough to make him give up. He had arrived in Tianhui City with the intention of solving the shortcomings of Phoenix regeneration technique, and thus he immediately wanted to look for some herbal medicines in accordance with the ones he had found from the tomb of the Flood Dragon, in order to create a longevity dan which could help in supplementing his exhausted life essence. The lack of life essence was the reason that he had already been stuck in the half-step legendary 4th stage for the last 2 months. It didn't mean that whatever he had accumulated so far was insufficient, but since his life essence was inadequate, he was getting old, and that too extremely fast. Although half-step legendary realm had contaminated the reputation of the legendary realm, if someone couldn't achieve the legendary level, they could still achieve the strength of legendary realm even while being in the half-step legendary realm. However, right now, what he couldn't achieve was the lifespan of legendary realm. Originally, the lifespan of Yi Shiwen used to be more than 500 years, but since he had consumed a massive amount of life essence recently, which was supposed to be converted into his lifespan, therefore, now he was almost equivalent to a person of nearly 400 years old. In other words, he could now be considered as very old. As for why people preferred young talent over old ones, the answer was quite simple. It was because in young age, vitality is exuberant with sufficient life essence along with infinite possibilities, which are enough to support one's life and help one break through to higher levels. The older a person would be, the greater the difficulty he would face in having breakthroughs. The same happened with Yi Shiwen. Now the age of his body was 400 years old, so breaking through to the half-step legendary 5th stage was highly unlikely for him. Although presently he could maintain his fighting strength at the peak of small complete legendary realm, it had still become very difficult for him to have a breakthrough. In fact, it could be said that it had become literally impossible for him. Therefore, he must find a way to supplement his life essence which he had lost so far. In case he really replenished his lost lifespan, he would finally regain the possibility of having further breakthroughs. Although he had the formula to concoct a longevity dan, he hadn't actually begun the preparation because he just had a few herbs required to concoct one. However, fortunately the ones he had were the main ingredients while the rest could be found easily. However, the only thing that was stopping him was a medicinal product called tianyuan fruit. It was very important to have a tianyuan fruit to concoct longevity dan. However, these fruits were getting rarer nowadays, as a consequence of which the longevity dan had ended up becoming a legendary drug. In case Yi Shiwen couldn't find the tianyuan fruit, he would then try to use only the available ingredients to increase his lifespan. However, the effect would be naturally far less. If it wasn't absolutely necessary, he wouldn't waste those ingredients like that. Tianhui City was the #1 bustling establishment in the Great Qin Empire, along with a huge trading market of its own, which was also quite famous for often having a lot of good things to buy. As soon as Yi Shiwen entered Tianhui City, he directly went to find Tianhui City's largest chamber of commerce. He had already inquired about it and knew that this chamber of commerce was the largest in the city. It was reported that Tianyuan City had the support of city's main government from behind, so no one dared to underestimate the city's famous Chamber of Commerce. The story didn't end here, because this Tianhui Chamber of Commerce was reckoned to be the best out there in the entire Qin Empire. Yi Shiwen barely strode in when there came an attendant to greet him. "Welcome to Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. How can I help you?" Yi Shiwen nodded slightly. Finally, he had reached the so-called #1 Chamber of Commerce. Although he was in ordinary attire, or it could be said that he looked somewhat shabby, still the other side didn't express any disgust. At least on the surface, he did not express anything. "I would like to sell a few herbs in your Chamber of Commerce, but I don't know who would come to receive it. Can you point me in the right direction?" Yi Shiwen asked. "Respectable gentleman, I don't know what kind of herbs you want to sell here, but we don't accept common medicinal herbs." The attendant clarified. After all, considering the financial resources of Tianhui Chamber of Commerce, common medicinal herbs certainly weren't of any value to them. "Is dragon grass good enough?" Yi Shiwen asked. The moment the attendant heard that, he was suddenly startled and said, "Sir, do you really have dragon grass?" Yi Shiwen nodded and thought in his heart that this place was really amazing because the name of dragon grass was even unknown to several warriors. However, this attendant not only knew about it, but it seemed that he also knew that it was a highly expensive and extraordinary item. "Gentlemen, please wait for a moment. I will ask our shopkeeper to come," the attendant said promptly. Chapter 3:22. The attendant requested Yi Shiwen to wait in the hall and went upstairs to inform the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce. After a while, a middle-aged man dressed in a robe came out with the attendant and said, "Excuse me for making you wait for so long. I am the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce, Xia Chun." "Xia Chun," Yi Shiwen said and cupped his hands in greeting. "So how should I address you, gentlemen?" Xia Chun asked. "My surname is Wan." Yi Shiwen didn't tell his full name, and nor did Xia Chun ask it again. Obviously, everyone had their own secrets, and as long as the business deal remained genuine, everything else was fine. "I do not know what Mr. Wan said about the dragon grass?" Xia Chun asked. Yi Shiwen pulled out dragon-shaped grass from the void. It was dark green in color, and a puff of smoke could be seen clouding around it. It released a group of lingqi into the surroundings, and even one single puff of its fragrance could fully open one's arteries. "This really is dragon grass," Xia Chun said in a trembling voice. Although dragon grass was not the most expensive item, it was definitely very rare because it could only be grown inside a dragon's territory. Even though this dragon grass had grown in a flood dragon's cave, it was still a rare treasure. After all, the dragon grass related to the true dragons only existed in the fables. Moreover, this is a second-grade dragon grass. Xia Chun was surprised as he looked at Yi Shiwen. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually have a second-grade dragon grass. Although dragon grass was considered a very rare treasure, since ancient times, a lot of people had been able to find a way to cultivate it. The dragon grass could only be grown inside a dragon territory, and dragonki was also required for growing it. Therefore, even if one had the seed itself, the dragon grass could not be grown. So, they thought of a way and captured a lot of demon beasts who possessed the blood vessels of dragons within themselves. That was how they had managed to cultivate rare herbs like dragon grass and various other dragon-related medicinal herbs. However, Even though those demon beasts had the dragon's blood vessels, they weren't real dragons after all. One must not forget that there was a huge difference between a real dragon and a flood dragon. Moreover, the quality of the dragon grass was also divided into different grades based on their age and nurturing. Dragon grass was divided into 9 grades, with the ones of first grade being of best quality, while the ones of ninth grade were the most inferior. Although the first grade dragon grass was the best, it was already considered as a legendary medicinal herb by the people. The best quality dragon grass could only be grown near the lair of a true dragon, whereas the second grade dragon grass could be grown near the lair of a flood dragon that shared a close bloodline with real dragons. Indeed, a second grade dragon grass could not be compared with a dragon grass of first grade. It was still a very rare treasure to come across. One must know that once a flood dragon was born in the legendary realm, its growth would be very fast, and it would reach adulthood very soon, reaching sage realm at the end of it. And if someone dared to plunder the lair of a sage-level flood dragon, then was it not equivalent to courting death? This was the reason why second-grade dragon grass was such a rare herb. In the ancient times, only famous experts were said to have obtained second-grade dragon grass. Not to mention that only a few experts would usually get the chance to obtain one, and that too with great difficulty. No wonder then that the dragon grass in Yi Zaiwen's hand had amazed Xia Chun. He was a very old man and had been the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce for a very long time. So the surprised expression that had flashed on his face a while ago didn't last long. Everyone had their own secrets, and it was not considered a good practice to probe into other secrets. Xia Chun, what do you think about this dragon grass? Is it good? Yi Shiwen asked. It is excellent, I must say. Xia Chun didn't want to praise the dragon grass too much as he further said, would you like to sell it to us? I was thinking of auctioning it here in your auction house. However, if you will give me the right price, I would love to sell it to you right now. Yi Shiwen said, really? If Mr. Wen would like to sell this dragon grass to us right now, then we would certainly give the most reasonable price for it, and would not let Mr. Wen suffer an early loss. Xia Chun was pleasantly surprised as he said that. He knew that if Yi Shiwen would have sold this dragon grass in the auction, then it would have slipped away from his hands. Moreover, the news of the appearance of a second-grade dragon grass would have definitely attracted the attention of city's strongest masters. It was certainly one of the best opportunities to draw in tourists and more potential customers. But Tianhui Chamber of Commerce had been in operation for thousands of years. They didn't need to resort to such a stunt to gain popularity. A lot of people would be interested in buying this second-grade dragon grass, so Tianhui Chamber of Commerce would probably wait for the right time to reveal it to the world. In any case, money was not an issue for the Chamber of Commerce, all thanks to its deep foundation of thousands of years, as well as its profound accumulation of resources. Yi Shiwen decided to sell it directly instead selling it at the auction because he couldn't afford to expose himself. Not to mention that his recent exploits had made him quite popular in the region. The sheer number of treasures he possessed could make anyone go crazy. Therefore, even if he was getting a bit less amount of money for the dragon grass, he didn't care. We would give 5 million Ling Dawn for this second-grade dragon grass. However, if you would sell it in the auction, you may get up to 6 or 7 million Ling Dawn. Xie Chen said, that is fine, but I want it right away. Yi Shiwen nodded. Xia Chen immediately threw a small bag filled with 5 million Ling Dawn towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used his soul search skill and verified the quality and quantity of the Ling Dawn. He was impressed by its supreme quality. He smiled and said, also, I would also like to entrust your Chamber of Commerce to help me in buying some medicinal herbs. What kind of medicinal herbs do you want? Xia Chen asked and continued, we may not be the strongest Chamber of Commerce, but you will still find a lot of herbs here. I want to buy Tianyuan fruit, and this and that. Yi Shiwen had prepared a list of herbs and spoke out all the names of the herbs one after another. The other herbs are not difficult to get, but the production of Tianyuan fruit has decreased in the last 2 years, Xia Chen said. Yi Shiwen frowned. Although he had expected this earlier, he still felt disappointed. Tianyuan fruit was a very important ingredient, even though there were many alternatives to it. but their effects were nothing like it. Although we don't have it in our inventory, you may find it in the city's giant market. You can go there and look for things that you need. You will find several warriors in the market who keep all kinds of stuff, and whatever you can't get outside can be easily found in the market. Xiaochen said. There was a sinister look in his eyes as he said this. He already knew that Yi Shiwen was not someone from this city. Thank you for pointing me in the right direction. However, how much will these other herbs cost? Yi Shiwen asked. Well, considers these herbs as gifts, which we would like to give to Mr. Wen. Xia Chun said in a generous tone. Yi Shiwen had made a business of 5 million ling don, and the combined cost of these ordinary herbs was nothing in comparison to that. In fact, the overall cost of these herbs would not even amount to 1 ling dan. If that's the case, then thank you. Yi Shiwen knew that both of them were looking for personal profits, and this was definitely not a favor from Xiaochen. Since the transaction is already complete, I will take my leave now, Yi Shiwen said. Take care. Xiaochen looked at Yi Ziwen's back profile as he was leaving the place. Xiaochen then went to the second floor and opened the door to a room. There was a tall woman inside the room who was looking outside the window. She appeared to be in her 20s, had a beautiful face, red lips, jade-like teeth, and a pretty nose that was complementing her overall beauty. Her big eyes were emitting brilliance. She was clad in a yellow robe and looked just like a fairy. Miss, I have followed your orders, Xiaochen said in a respectful manner. Good. The woman replied in a melodious tone. I just have one doubt, if I may ask. Since we have found out that that person is Yi Shiwen, then why not? If Yi Shiwen was here, then he would certainly be shocked. He would be surprised to know that since meeting the attendant to sealing the deal with Xiaochen, not even a quarter of an hour had passed, but his identity had still been discovered. One could imagine the influence of the Chamber of Commerce. And like others, do you also want to intercept him for the sake of one page of ancient God scripture? The woman smiled and said, This is not how we operate here at Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. Our motto is to keep getting rich while maintaining cordial relations with all. Indeed, that is absolutely right. Mississippi, Xiaochen quickly nodded and said, You have read the news about Yi Shiwen and his killing sprees, right? So many people have tried to kill him, but ultimately they all died at his hands. The woman continued, Some people are very stupid because they just cannot seem to understand a simple point that these top-notch geniuses have emerged victorious from their respective regional competitions. Then how can they possibly be ordinary? In fact, some of them have already been noticed by the elder brothers in Team U. Sooner or later, they would join Team U and make contacts with a lot of formidable experts there. In the end, these young geniuses would become invincible masters. I already have detailed files on some of these young geniuses, Yi Shiwen being one of them. I can already tell that in the future, Yi Shiwen would certainly become my junior disciple. Like they say, beat the snake to death or it will cause endless calamity. If we fail to kill him now, then think about the amount of energy and resources we might have to spend in the future to get rid of him. It would be too costly, simply not worth the effort. Only those fools do not know and think that since Team U recruits new disciples only once in 100 years, so they must take advantage of this event to killing those geniuses and gain a lot of benefits. In fact, several clans have flourished because of this twisted grinding of young talents, while at the same time, many clans also perished at the hands of those young geniuses. Those fools must consider the fact that these young geniuses would one day become formidable masters of Team U and may enter Sage Realm in the future. When that happens, they would surely come back to seek revenge. If you fail to kill them now, you must be prepared to face their wrath later on. I have heard that Yi Shiwen too has single-handedly destroyed an entire clan to take revenge. Therefore, let them fight while we watch from the sidelines. The woman said in a cold voice. Yes, miss. To be continued. 5 million ling dawn. The attendant requested Yi Shiwen to wait in the hall and went upstairs to inform the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce. After a while, a middle-aged man dressed in a robe came out with the attendant and said, Excuse me for making you wait for so long. I am the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce, Xiaochen. Xiaochen, Yi Shiwen said, and cupped his hands in greeting. "So how should I address you, gentlemen?" Xiachen asked. "My surname is One." Yishuan didn't tell his full name, and nor did Xiachen ask it again. Obviously, everyone had their own secrets, and as long as the business deal remained genuine, everything else was fine. "I do not know what Mr. Wen said about the dragon grass," Xiachen asked. Yi Shiwen pulled out dragon-shaped grass from the void. It was dark green in color, and a puff of smoke could be seen clouding around it. It released a group of lingqi into the surroundings, and even one single puff of its fragrance could fully open one's arteries. "This really is dragon grass," Xia Chun said in a trembling voice. Although dragon grass was not the most expensive item, it was definitely very rare because it could only be grown inside a dragon's territory. Even though this dragon grass had grown in a flood dragon's cave, it was still a rare treasure. After all, the dragon grass related to the true dragons only existed in the fables. Moreover, this is a second-grade dragon grass. Xia Chun was surprised as he looked at Yi Shiwen. He did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually have a second-grade dragon grass. Although dragon grass was considered a very rare treasure, since ancient times a lot of people had been able to find a way to cultivate it. The dragon grass could only be grown inside a dragon territory, and dragonki was also required for growing it. Therefore, even if one had the seed itself, the dragon grass could not be grown. So, they thought of a way and captured a lot of demon beasts who possessed the blood vessels of dragons within themselves. That was how they had managed to cultivate rare herbs like dragon grass and various other dragon-related medicinal herbs. However, even though those demon beasts had the dragon's blood vessels, they weren't real dragons after all. One must not forget that there was a huge difference between a real dragon and a flood dragon. Moreover, the quality of the dragon grass was also divided into different grades based on their age and nurturing. Dragon grass was divided into 9 grades, with the ones of first grade being of best quality, while the ones of 9th grade were the most inferior. Although the first grade dragon grass was the best, it was already considered as a legendary medicinal herb by the people. The best quality dragon grass could only be grown near the lair of a true dragon, whereas the second-grade dragon grass could be grown near the lair of a flood dragon that shared a close bloodline with real dragons. Indeed, a second-grade dragon grass could not be compared with a dragon grass of first grade. It was still a very rare treasure to come across. One must know that once a flood dragon was born in the legendary realm, its growth would be very fast, and it would reach adulthood very soon, reaching Sage Realm at the end of it. And if someone dared to plunder the lair of a Sage-level flood dragon, then was it not equivalent to courting death? This was the reason why second-grade dragon grass was such a rare herb. In the ancient times, only famous experts were said to have obtained second-grade dragon grass. Not to mention that only a few experts would usually get the chance to obtain one, and that too with great difficulty. No wonder then that the dragon grass in Yi Zaiwen's hand had amazed Xia Chun. He was a very old man and had been the chief shopkeeper of the Chamber of Commerce for a very long time, so the surprised expression that had flashed on his face a while ago didn't last long. Everyone had their own secrets, and it was not considered a good practice to probe into other secrets. "Xia Chun, what do you think about this dragon grass? Is it good?" Yi Xuan asked. "It is excellent, I must say." Xia Chun didn't want to praise the dragon grass too much as he further said, "Would you like to sell it to us? I was thinking of auctioning it here in your auction house. However, if you will give me the right price, I would love to sell it to you right now." Yi Shiwen said, "Really? If Mr. Wen would like to sell this dragon grass to us right now, then we would certainly give the most reasonable price for it and would not let Mr. Wen suffer an early loss." Xia Chun was pleasantly surprised as he said that. He knew that if Yi Shiwen would have sold this dragon grass in the auction, then it would have slipped away from his hands. Moreover, the news of the appearance of a second-grade dragon grass would have definitely attracted the attention of city's strongest masters. It was certainly one of the best opportunities to draw in tourists and more potential customers. But Tianhui Chamber of Commerce had been in operation for thousands of years. They didn't need to resort to such a stunt to gain popularity. A lot of people would be interested in buying this second-grade dragon grass, so Tianhui Chamber of Commerce would probably wait for the right time to reveal it to the world. In any case, money was not an issue for the Chamber of Commerce, all thanks to its deep foundation of thousands of years, as well as its profound accumulation of resources. Yi Shiwen decided to sell it directly, instead selling it at the auction because he couldn't afford to expose himself. Not to mention that his recent exploits had made him quite popular in the region. The sheer number of treasures he possessed could make anyone go crazy. Therefore, even if he was getting a bit less amount of money for the dragon grass, he didn't care. We would give 5 million Ling Dawn for this second gray dragon grass. However, if you would sell it in the auction, you may get up to 6 or 7 million Ling Dawn. Xiachen said. That is fine, but I want it right away. Yi Shiwen nodded. Xiachen immediately threw a small bag filled with 5 million Ling Dawn towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen used his soul search skill and verified the quality and quantity of the Ling Dawn. He was impressed by its supreme quality. He smiled and said, "Also, I would also like to entrust your Chamber of Commerce to help me in buying some medicinal herbs." "What kind of medicinal herbs do you want?" Xiachen asked and continued, "We may not be the strongest Chamber of Commerce, but you will still find a lot of herbs here. I want to buy Tianyuan fruit, and this and that." Yi Shiwen had prepared a list of herbs and spoke out all the names of the herbs one after another. The other herbs are not difficult to get, but the production of Tianyuan fruit has decreased in the last 2 years. Xiachen said. Yi Shiwen frowned. Although he had expected this earlier, he still felt disappointed. Tianyuan fruit was a very important ingredient, even though there were many alternatives to it, but their effects were nothing like it. Although we don't have it in our inventory, you may find it in the city's giant market. You can go there and look for things that you need. You will find several warriors in the market who keep all kinds of stuff, and whatever you can't get outside can be easily found in the market. Xiachen said. There was a sinister look in his eyes as he said this. He already knew that Yi Shiwen was not someone from this city. "Thank you for pointing me in the right direction. However, how much will these other herbs cost?" Yi Shiwen asked. "Well, considers these herbs as gifts which we would like to give to Mr. Wen," Xiachen said in a generous tone. Yi Shiwen had made a business of 5 million Ling Dawn, and the combined cost of these ordinary herbs was nothing in comparison to that. In fact, the overall cost of these herbs would not even amount to 1 Ling Dan. If that's the case, then thank you. Yi Shiwen knew that both of them were looking for personal profits, and this was definitely not a favor from Xiachen. "Since the transaction is already complete, I will take my leave now," Yi Shiwen said. "Take care." Xiachen looked at Yi Ziwen's back profile as he was leaving the place. Xiachen then went to the second floor and opened the door to a room. There was a tall woman inside the room who was looking outside the window. She appeared to be in her 20s, had a beautiful face, red lips, jade-like teeth, and a pretty nose that was complementing her overall beauty. Her big eyes were emitting brilliance. She was clad in a yellow robe and looked just like a fairy. "Miss, I have followed your orders," Xiachen said in a respectful manner. "Good," the woman replied in a melodious tone. "I just have one doubt, if I may ask. Since we have found out that that person is Yi Shiwen, then why not? If Yi Shiwen was here, then he would certainly be shocked. He would be surprised to know that since meeting the attendant to sealing the deal with Xiachen, not even a quarter of an hour had passed, but his identity had still been discovered. One could imagine the influence of the Chamber of Commerce. And like others, do you also want to intercept him for the sake of 1 page of ancient god scripture? The woman smiled and said, "This is not how we operate here at Tianhui Chamber of Commerce. Our motto is to keep getting rich while maintaining cordial relations with all." "Indeed, that is absolutely right, Mississippi," Xiachen quickly nodded and said. "You have read the news about Yi Shiwen and his killing sprees, right? So many people have tried to kill him, but ultimately they all died at his hands." The woman continued, "Some people are very stupid because they just cannot seem to understand a simple point that these top-notch geniuses have emerged victorious from their respective regional competitions. Then how can they possibly be ordinary? In fact, some of them have already been noticed by the elder brothers in Team U. Sooner or later, they would join Team U and make contacts with a lot of formidable experts there. In the end, these young geniuses would become invincible masters. I already have detail files on some of these young geniuses, Yi Shiwen being one of them. I can already tell that in the future, Yi Shiwen would certainly become my junior disciple. Like they say, beat the snake to death, or it will cause endless calamity. If we fail to kill him now, then think about the amount of energy and resources we might have to spend in the future to get rid of him. It would be too costly, simply not worth the effort. Only those fools do not know and think that since Team U recruits new disciples only once in 100 years, so they must take advantage of this event to killing those geniuses and gain a lot of benefits. In fact, several clans have flourished because of this twisted grinding of young talents, while at the same time, many clans also perished at the hands of those young geniuses. Those fools must consider the fact that these young geniuses would one day become formidable masters of Team U and may enter Sage Realm in the future. When that happens, they would surely come back to seek revenge. If you fail to kill them now, you must be prepared to face their wrath later on. I have heard that Yi Shiwen too has single-handedly destroyed an entire clan to take revenge. Therefore, let them fight while we watch from the sidelines. The woman said in a cold voice. Yes, miss. To be continued, that you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.